And
Alleged
so,
game of chicken. Do you call it chicken in the UK?
yeah, we do, yeah. Typically, seeing how long you can like stand in front of an oncoming car or something like that.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes. Have
What do
you
you?
heard that the joke that's being touted as like an as an autistic trait thing because everything's an autism test now on social media of like believing first off I never got the joke why did the chicken cross the road like literally that if you're neurodivergent you think of it as a physical place to get to the other side but the pun is that it's so it can die and get to the other side and I have never heard the interpretation in my life that
No,
it would be a pun. um, and
no.
so I put that along with the time shift that supposedly happened between May and September of last year, where like the heart is now in the center of the chest and no longer on the left side, and the kidneys are in the middle of your back, no longer on the lower part,
Uh-huh.
and
Uh-huh.
things like that that mark that like we have shifted dimensions.
This,
Um,
yes, the Masala effect,
yeah,
which I believe has always been called that.
but yeah. Complete with our coloration and transplanted sounds
Mhm.
of any dialect. Hello, everyone.
Hiya.
It was the most organic of intros. It was the the least of times. It was the most of times. Um, but hello and welcome to episode 38, I believe, of Radio Free Golgotha. I believe because my notes say it's episode 38, so I will factually support that it is episode 38. So
Mhm.
hello and welcome to Radio Free Golgotha. We are um, Dr. Al Cummins, and I am Jesse Hatwedias, and we do this semi-regular podcast thing. If you're not familiar with us, please visit www.radiofreegolgotha.com or find us on Facebook. We have an Instagram, but we haven't really used it yet. Uh,
Mm.
we do have chat room and chat room, but that's an AOL flashback. Wow. We have a Facebook group called Folk Necromancy where you can find useless informations about dead people
Mhm.
and magics with dead people, or songs about dead people, or classes about dead people and making dead people, not killing them, but like making undead of the dead. That's probably a better way to say it. And
Unaliving, I believe, is
yeah,
the algorithm friendly term for the time being.
yeah, undeading or unaliving,
Yeah.
disaliving. Oh wow. This is I and the reason for this intro in this way is that I often forget to say it at the end of it and tag it so that people know where to find us.
Yeah.
Because if you want to find us, don't, or at least me. You can find Al. So episode 38. This is the Feast of Saint Rose of Lima,
Hmm.
and the first Catholic of the New World to be sainted, uh, I believe. But on this Feast of Saint Rose, we are Sesame Streeting TM our way with Stolas as our demon, Sleep Deprivation as our magic, Selenite as our stone, Conjunctio and its homoformic counterpart, a Wari Meiji, and then the Lover's card. And as our dead magicianess, the lovely Maria Sabina. So, hi, Al. What's new?
Hiya. I mean, looking at the top of these, I like that we've got some moony stuff going on. We've got some rather than sleep magic, the lack of sleep magic going on. Got some coagula kind of brewing early on with the lovers and with conjunctio arguably, and then another slightly more recent magician or magicianess. Yeah, I'm excited to get into those.
And
So,
more chickens. Chickens before the rose. Um,
all right, yeah, Merry Rosemas, everyone.
yeah.
Let's start with our saint as we usually do, right?
Yes, we can begin at the beginning.
Rather than beginning in the middle, then going back to the start for a little bit,
No,
then
that's
maybe
what I am
panning
here
out,
for. I am here for.
then giving a couple different perspectives of different characters who are seeing the same thing from slightly different events. That's not the Rashomon I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah, before continuing on, getting distracted, and then landing where we land. No, instead we get to
Time
start.
is a pancake, and I am the syrup. Yes. Um, but okay, so wonderful. I know out of the two of us, most likely to have done the research. Although Saint Rose I know very well.
Well, there we go, right? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, no, let's begin where we begin, all right? So, Rose of Lima, or by her government name, Isabel Flores de Olivia, uh, is apparently born the 20th of April, 1586.
Hitler's
And
birthday.
is it?
Yeah. And
Oh,
Earth Day. Yeah.
oh, and Earth Day. All right, there we go. And we'll get to her death when we get to it, I guess, if we're gonna try and keep things on track. She's one of 11 children. She's the seventh, as far as I could count, of 11 children. She is, as many of these saints are, of a noble family. A noble family that also seems to fall on hard times for a variety of reasons. Her father, Gaspar Flores, was a cavalryman or a harquebuser in the Imperial Spanish Army, and it's worth bearing in mind that she's born in the capital city of the newly established viceroyalty of Peru,
Mhm.
which is some 55 years after the first Spanish conquerors arrive and begin, carving up the territory. It's a place governed by the Kingdom of Spain at the time, and while he's it seems Spanish, there's a bit more debate about her mother and her grandmother being of mixed Peruvian and Spanish kind of heritage
Mhm.
of various sorts. So there's some pretty early stuff about her and her childhood. The name comes supposedly from a vision that it seems to count to say her grandmother. Sometimes it says a servant or a maid has
Mhm.
this vision of a beautiful rose just over the child's face, which makes a lot more sense of a vision than other accounts where it says her face looked like a rose, which kind of gets repeated in terms of the reddening of it. Apparently, she's supposedly reading at some point before she's 5 years old.
Mhm.
Um, and she's especially interested, it seems, early on and towards kind of late teens as well, with the lifestyle of well, it's lifestyle. That's really there's a very magazine way of putting it, of the life of Catherine of Siena, right? Especially her penitence and things like that. And some reports also say that she was kind of a bit of a sick kid in terms of sickly, as opposed to torturing animals, and said that sometimes that she dedicated her pains to the Lord, which of course begins a long life of penitent acts and kind of concepts of like divine suffering and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
I think it's interesting to point out like what that point of saints make other saints consistently in Catholicism, right? So contact
mm,
and contagion, that not only was she modeling some of her trajectory after Catherine of Siena, so it's especially female saints look to other female saints, right? You have the relationship between Agatha and Lucy that
mm,
we've talked about before, and many other female saints who are inspired by looking for women in the historical record of saintdom.
yeah,
Of this is an extremely important factor in who women are modeling their lives after, especially in I think all over the world, but especially in this quote unquote new world, right, where there's not a model for what is being done. There's
mm,
this belief that America is part of the promised kingdom, that this is part of the inheritance of the good Catholics,
mm,
that like this is a reward for keeping the faith,
mm,
and fighting off the Moors and expelling the Jews and all these other things that Spain and the Iberian Peninsula has done,
yeah,
in the wake of Protestantism rising and all these things, that the true faith has been rewarded. So
mm,
there's this, I think there's right, the Criolla Mother and things that are going there. And also that like as far as saints making other saints, the bishop that confirmed her, Toribio de Mongreveo, was also the Archbishop of Lima. He was also made a saint.
mm,
So there's the saints, this contact that happens because you're going
mm,
to see with her later in life, right, where there's two prominent saints that are her friends with her, but like very specifically, Martin de Porres is going to come in here, who
mm,
is also famous worldwide and only was sainted more recently, but is also important as Peruvian New World trajectory. Sorry, but The idea that
Yeah,
saints make saints is interesting to me. The contagion itself.
yeah, for sure.
It's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
if you
yeah.
miss
Like you
the
said,
if you can't become a priest and have the apostolic succession, that there's something else that in modeling your life after a female saint or a pattern saint through confirmation, acceptance of a name, and taking on the mantle of the
mm,
faith, that somehow there can be its own kind of lateral apostolic succession or at least beatific succession that can happen. It seems.
dead saints all the way up and down,
Yeah, saints
as
all
well
the
as
way down,
magicians. Yeah, 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 yeah. That's a
and a
really good
wise man
point.
for a father. So.
Right, right, right. Which it does seem there are, familial tensions going on from the start, right? She seems to want to be a nun and a holy woman very early on, and we run across the typical difficulties of like, we're a noble family, we need you married off to secure political alliances of
Yeah.
various sorts. This is not great. Yeah, apparently her mom actually refused to call her Rose. It was a thing with her grandmother, but by the age of 11, yeah, she receives this confirmation and formally takes the name. And it seems around that time she also uh, takes some form of a vow of chastity, um, which again her father is not a huge fan of. But by her kind of teens, it seems they do finally grant her like a small hut on the family property that she kind of increasingly sort of recluses into, but also administers to the sick and needy in that place, like takes them there. And while she's said to be mostly just leaving for either doing outreach work or going to mass, she starts receiving she starts doing the sacrament every day, which apparently was still not widely done at that time, which again, a sign of her great piety. But she's also famously selling needlework and embroidery and making lace, which is its own kind of magic when you see those people doing that with all the bobbins and stuff. Deeply complicated spider magics. She's also growing flowers, and she's bringing those to market, and it's just often partly for donating to the needy in and around the area, but also for money for the family, it seems. So she's also trying to pay her way. She also seems to around this time go. I don't want to. There's whole books written about whether you can say it's vegetarianism, but certainly abstains from meat. It seems
Mhm.
around that time, and she is again forbidden from becoming a full nun, and so she enters into the Third Order of St. Dominic, which is a lay fraternity, right?
Mhm.
And she's still living with her folks at this point. And by her 20th year, she's taken this vow of perpetual virginity and kind of fully into her kind of period of starting to do her more, I don't want to say severe, but her more full on penance of various sorts. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of like that kind of teenage years stuff?
No, I mean, I think we've talked about third orders before because there's quite a few saints,
Right.
uh, and especially female saints who became third order saints because they were of noble birth. So their families were like, "You're not leaving the property. We're
Right.
not granting you access to go join a monastery or an abbey or anything."
Yeah.
So they will house them there, and by joining a third order, you don't live in the nunnery, but you can don the clothes of an order.
Right.
So you are basically LARPing as a member of that rule, and you have to figure out. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but like you don't know what it's like to live in community with the people that have the same vows as you. You
Right.
actually have to forge a way whereby that I think is directly comparable in some ways to like liberal Catholics and Gnostic priests now who are trying to figure out how to integrate. I mean, this difference of third order in this time period, Rose comes from a noble family, so they're still supporting her in that way, monetarily. But it's interesting because it is a lot like ceremonial magicians and Eucharistic priests who want that engaging in this specific Christian mystery, who don't have the gold of the Catholic Church, or even higher Protestant churches or mega churches, but
Yeah.
to be the thing that keeps them safe. They have to still have a 9 to 5 job, and that they're still celebrating mass on the weekends and things like this. It's a very interesting mission, and then it makes you have to kind of reinvent the wheel and your life consistently. I think that balance between priesthood and the demands of how you can support your priesthood really
Mm,
come at odds, especially when there's not necessarily a vow of poverty here.
right.
That's not what's being said. So a vow of chastity or virginity specifically, like chastity is one thing, but virginity is a whole other, right? Like
Yeah.
chasteness, you can be chaste in marriage.
Right.
And it implies just proper application of sexuality. But
Conduct
like,
thing. Yeah.
I am perpetual virgin is a
Mm,
huge thing, which means you have just denied your parents the ability to marry you off.
right.
Um, so it's an interesting side of it. And I do like, I appreciate the nod of like, is it vegetarianism when you're abstaining from meat? What is meat exactly? In
Hmm.
this case, meat goes back and forth from being flesh of an animal to warm flesh, like red flesh, to
Hmm.
meat being substantially any smidgen of thing when a raven brings it to you. Like, it, and
Yeah,
it's like,
the meat of a dish, right? The main
yeah.
thing on the plate. Yeah.
But I think there's this tendency within, because she died when she was 31 and we haven't even gotten to that part yet, but
Yeah.
that the kind of willful teenage rebellion that happens when it's specifically like Catholic lifestyle, like I wish to be close to God, and
Mm.
they rebel through being holy is fascinating to me. And it also reminds me a little bit of there's this great documentary that is looking at a few different Tibetan nuns, excuse me. But among them, Annie Choying-Droma, who's also a musician, a singer that's fantastic. But she talks about it, in Tibetan society, that considering it's an incredibly sexist culture with a religion that promotes this kind of evolution of the soul, but the word for woman is lesser sex, right? And so it's already got a thing there that the only way for a woman to have any agency is to become a nun. And so I think there's something in that with nuns, and we can explore the role of the educated upper class elites, because there's no middle class at this time.
Right.
Um, the upper class elites and their daughters who do not wish to just become vessels of political alliance through marriage
Yeah.
and child bearers. That there's a lot going on, and so you'll get all of the people with different motivations that are becoming lay priests or lay clergy, I guess you could say, because that's an oxymoron. But they're joining things like third orders, and they're not even fully therefore committed to an order, but live in this form of rebellion against their
Yeah.
family and against the status quo by being the very thing that their family is supposed to uphold as well.
Yeah.
So they found the loophole, which is
Yeah.
it is the ultimate in fuck yous of teenage rebellion. I do really love that she, in her vow, that part of her specific accoutrement, her things, that she had a crown commissioned of heavy silver, which had spikes. It had the crown of thorns on the inside digging into her head.
Right. Right.
This is like, I'm crowned already. I have the crown of victory, but the crown of victory is also the crown of thorns. And I like that relationship between this, like, it's a heavy crown of silver. This is, again, no vow of poverty here. This
Hmm.
That's not what's going on. It is a vow of privilege, way of
Yeah.
living in community with God. And that's something to be considered too. Like, this is part and parcel of like the Catholic Church at this time, where it's at the height of opulence
Hmm.
and growing opulence of like, this is, I think that quote unquote deserved inheritance of the New World mentality that's going down in early modern Spain.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Yeah.
yeah, and she achieves these levels of ecstasy that is not unlike other female saints before.
Yeah.
And what is that ecstasy? I mean, like, we have accounts of it, but is this the near orgasmic of Teresa of Avila and things like this, or is it just the abstinence? Is she fasting? She does only sleep 2 hours a night. She vows to sleep no more than 2 hours a night.
Yeah, and there's all
So
sorts of fascinating stuff about how she does that, like practically, right? They said that she would tie her hair to a nail on the wall while she prays, so that if when the head nod starts, when the window licking begins, that it would pull her head and keep her awake. There are accounts of her bed that she made for herself, consisting of broken glass and like
yep,
thorns and stones and stuff like that. And yeah, she's rocking this silver crown underneath a crown of roses as well sometimes, and
yeah.
even like a chain of spikes around her waist, which amongst other things is also pointing out that like hair's breadth difference, if there is any, between Catholicism and being goth as fuck, right?
Yeah. There's a lot of devices like that, right? Like, I guess the most modern references to those things is going to be the Opus Dei artifacts that are like mentioned in or seen in Da Vinci Code and that type of thing
Mm.
of wearing these extremely um, both medieval in the accuracy of their description and in the kind of adjective that comes out of that term.
Dracodian, yeah.
Yeah, of just mortification of the flesh as being part of good Catholicism
Yeah.
and our inheritance of the Goth as Goth. Um, the Visigoths are an important. I mean, like we don't have a lot of leftover Visigothic language in Spanish. We have more Arabic than we do Visigothic, but I still love the fact that a lot of the words can just be written in Visigothic runes. Like it's just go look up Visigothic runes. They're fun to play in.
Yeah.
As far as the Spanish inheritance, Spain is an interesting case in all of this. Here's my ADHD go. Just Spain has so much more influence than people initially think when they're coming from usually more traditional British and like French Germanic parts of Europe.
Mm.
Not only because of its Moorish Muslim past, it was the end of the world. So whether it was Ireland and its Hyperboreanness, which was like too far, right? That was just where like sheep and people and fairies were. But like Spain was still on mainland Europe. So Spain and Portugal become pilgrimage routes, and there's all this. It's the end of the opposite end of the world from Jerusalem. Like we don't Christendom doesn't really know what exists past Jerusalem. They do, but they kind of ignore it, right? Like China's out there somewhere,
Yeah.
and there is a sub-Saharan Africa, but we don't really believe it yet. And
Yeah.
like even though ships are going around in this time period, the average person isn't necessarily like having an accurate view of the world in their head. There's a lot of
Mm.
speculation at this time, but I do think that there's Spain and its roots with Phoenicia, the Greeks, the Romans, that like Spain still will claim to be the most Catholic country in the world and will still say that it is more Catholic than Italy.
Mm.
Uh, and fist fights over it. Like it is an inheritance of the Roman Empire, just not the Holy Roman Empire in the same way.
Mm.
And neither Roman nor Holy nor Empire. Um, but I just Spain is really loving really a twisted history that I think gets kind of pushed aside as kind of more homogenized, especially by the time America starts to look at south of the border as one kind of Spanish inheritance,
Right.
and as like especially viewing stereotypes of Mexico and the Caribbean as its
Mm.
way of understanding Spain, as opposed to Spain being something, this giant colonizing power with tons of influences and little warring families that just by this smidgen of whatever start having these rise to power.
Yeah.
Uh, and the interplay of the different castas, the up to 36 racial classifications that come in, of which the mother being a criolla, and this is where you don't know because that term can be used for many things.
Right.
But someone who is not born in Spain could be full-blooded Spaniard, but by being born in this land of Peru, that somehow you are not the same.
Mm.
And there's a whole interesting bits of things there. The way that Spain dealt with slavery, and Peru has there is a huge Afro-Peruvian population, as you'll see with like Martin de Porres,
Right.
because he's worth. I mean, that's the shrine. Their shrines are next to each other, in the convent of Saint Dominic in Lima. Um,
Yeah, and she like lived right around the corner from him apparently,
yeah,
in
yeah,
life. So she is like getting out a little bit, or at least, going to church with a pal, which, I think that's important, right?
yeah. I think. I mean, we will have to do him on another day for sure, just
Yeah.
because he's got so much interesting lore and syncretic lore as well.
Hmm.
Rose seems to be less. I mean, you do find some syncretization, yeah,
Hmm.
of her in some Caribbean expressions, in specifically things like 21 Divisions,
Mm.
according to academic books. Not saying that from personal experience, but she seems to be more preserved as a saint more often than not,
Yeah.
and less as a mask for other things. And I don't know if that's because, in order to be a successful magician, you must go far away from where you're home. But Martin de Porres is immediately assumed into syncretic masks
Mm.
across, the various of the Americas. But
Yeah,
yeah,
it's almost like the rose isn't just like a feature. It's her name and like a key part. She's like a rose saint. It seems most
yes,
commonly like across the bits and pieces I was reading around like the Caribbean and Trinidad and Tobago and things like that. More specifically, yeah, it's actual rose gardens. It's actually
yeah,
this association with like nature and the the bleeding blossom.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, is that maybe it is syncretic in the sense that it fills something that's not human.
Hmm.
It's a value center of something else. It's shifting to the rose itself.
Yeah.
Um, I hadn't I hadn't thought of that. That's fascinating. Yes, in the sense that she's rose everywhere,
Yeah.
but it is still a form of synchronization. It is still a form of like, what is she fulfilling? I mean, if synchronization is truly about the dominant cultural expression, like subsuming the lesser, but in this case, like if there's a dominant value center
Yeah.
of rose itself, what does the rose mean? What is the rose blood? What is
Hmm.
this idea of the divine rose that it is a little Mary in many ways, but it is also the blood of Jesus.
Right.
Um, the mortification of the flesh that happens there. There's a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
she feels she does wrong, and she'll hold her hands over burning censers and burn her hands.
Mm.
Um, and this, like, this constant, the crown of thorns becomes a crown of roses for her, and that's
Yeah.
an interesting side of it. I mean, there's a hagiographic blur that happens between Rose of Lima and Saint Rita. Uh,
Mm.
or that their relationship in various folk expressions. You'll hear that in the Borderlands, this kind of sister, that they're sisters or something. Obviously, they're not.
Mm.
Or that as saints, they're kindred, because Saint Rita is depicted with the thorns
Right.
and Saint Rose is depicted with the rose. Crown
Mm.
of roses, and both have this mortification of the flesh, but one is a young woman and one is an older mother. Uh,
Mm.
and so the kind of fictive family relationships of saints working with each other, having predilections towards what kind of workings they'll work for,
Yeah.
the kind of greater environments of curanderismo, brujeria, conjure, obia, and things like this that kind of grow and express through these different value centers and saints.
Mm.
But to go back to her teenage years, is ecstasy, yes, right? Like, she lives in this kind of, like, I go into my hovel,
Hmm.
into my grotto, and I go to mass, and that's about. She eventually works it out that that's what she does, and
Yeah.
that she seems to have an audience. People know who she is.
Mm.
She is much loved. She has friends that are also similarly selecting the religious life. Her funeral was held in the cathedral. Now, was this because of her popularity, because of the nobility? Doesn't really matter. But the
Mm.
public authorities of Lima are there, and that she's, there's a long illness that happens. And so it's what, 11, 10, it's like a decade or more where she's 10, 11, 12 years.
Yeah, she's in what yeah, what Liber Wikipedia calls her intervals of ecstasy for about 11 years. And in that time, there are a couple like healing miracles associated with her. She's having visions of Jesus and Mary and the saints, and is like having full conversations with them. It's here that there's a lot of the taking like married to Jesus very, very seriously, referring to Christ as a spouse, and him apparently referring to her as his beloved. All sorts of conceptions of interpreting periods of spiritual dryness as its own kind of blessing, by
Yeah.
which you can understand, the joy that comes in working through them, I guess. These kinds of concepts. She's also apparently attracting the attention of the Inquisition at various points, and seems to have been at least once interrogated by them. And this is often taken as a mark of her holiness, because apparently the Inquisitors were impressed by the accuracy of her answers about doctrine and conduct and things like that. There's also an account before she passes in 1617, in 1615, where there's all sorts of worries about not just general piracy outside Lima, but concerns that these pirates are about to raid and overrun the city. And it's
Hmm.
said that Santa Rosa is warned by God in a vision to pray unceasingly for 24 hours. For Lima and all its peoples to be spared, and she gathers up a variety of people to do this as well. And it is said that this is what saves the city of Lima from this happening.
Hmm.
So she's already like gathering people and stuff, and then said 24th of August, 1617, she passes at the only at 31 after and yes, it's after a long illness, but it's also after reducing her diet to only bread and water, apparently. And as one of those last little like mini miracles, she's said to have prophesied the date of her death. And by the time we get to her funeral, there's all sorts of stuff about her funeral. So yeah, it's this major event. All the city authorities are supposedly there. It's said sometimes that she had to be reburied a total of 3 times. because so many people are turning up. There's this unending crowd apparently to like see the holy body, and a bunch of like sick folks are coming and kind of and allegedly being cured as well. And there's all sorts of like shouts through that. It's a whole thing, right? So they're not just worried about like the sheer crowds of it. They're also worried about people trying to grab bits of her, right? Her clothing and her hair as relics and things like that. And so it's said that the third burial takes place in secret in the dead of night. And it's one of those things where it's alleged that no one quite knows where it, or almost no one, it's not publicly known, her actual burial site. It's also said that during the one, at least one of these funerals, I can work out which one. I guess there's one funeral and then a couple of reburyings, that the coffin remains open, and that a bunch of people, and these are like nuns, bishops, priests, and so on, all see a statue of Our Lady of the Rosary smiling as she's kind of brought in. So again, this notion of like the beloved daughter coming back home and coming to rest with the saints and with God. Yeah. So there's the miraculous healings that are attributed to her intercession while she's alive, which is things like curing a leper. But there's also all sorts of specifically, again, rose-related phenomena at her death and her funeral. So the city is said to have smelled of roses, and it's even said that roses fall from the sky on this day. Which is a beautiful image. She's also said to have appeared separately to three different people meditating at her tomb, dressed in white, holding a palm, and led by angels before the throne of the Holy Virgin, and receiving another crown, a crown of glory from the BVM. So this it's a big deal, and it kind of goes a fair way to explain why. Yeah, so she passes in 1617. She's beatified by Clement IX in 1668, and then canonized by April 12th of 1671. So it's a pretty rapid
50 years
ascension.
Very fast.
Yeah. By the next pope, by Clement X. And again, looking into the dates of that, it's originally her feast day is given as the 30th of August because the 24th clashed with St. Bartholomew. But by Vatican II, at least by the reforms that go in by 1969, that clears the 23rd. But there's also still veneration of her on the other 2 days, like around the world. Yeah, and her skull, crowned with roses, is apparently still on public display in Lima at the Basilica.
Yes.
Along with her pal Martin, as well as St. Juan Macias. Yeah. And so,
there's some beautiful, just icon, or they usually only depict Rose and Martin, but it's interesting because this concept of three skulls is going to come up constantly with American Catholicism. It's just this. I mean, you see it with the Cyprian cult, and even without a knowledge of Theoctistus being like a Catholic saint, right? So there's still this notion of like Justina, Cyprian, and another, or here in this case, Rosa Martin, and another. But we know who this other happens to be.
Yeah.
Yes, it's just really lovely. The imagery there too, like, and there's also a hagiographic blur there with Rosalia, depending on where you're at. Because just it's if you're gonna put roses on someone and someone's name is that, but Rosalia tends to be more in the north, like in the Mexican permutations, because we had a lot of Sicilian priests come in at one point into central Mexico and carried the cult of Rosalia into like the norteño expressions of things. But Rosa of Lima is just, she was beatified and canonized so quickly that she becomes very important in the New World because she, for a long time, is the only American saint.
Yeah.
And like that was like the viejas used to refer to La Americana. Like that was important, that she represented the inheritance of the Hispanics in the New World. Regardless of, what race you were, what casta you descended from. But the Rose of Lima was proof that we could be as holy as those of the old world. And so I think there's something to that also, that there was this, you see that with, Martin comes in much later. Martin is not canonized until very recently. He was blessed, but he was not canonized. And again, that 50 years, like everyone liked Rose of Lima. Like in her, like she was just, and of course, saving the town from pirates is not a bad thing. Lima, the small village of Lima, Peru. I do like the returning home of the skulls has its own ritual, right? Because it is the skulls are separated from the body and are venerated in a different way and put on public display and are often touring around the country. Uh,
Yes.
and that's how, it's one way you make money. But the torsos are like weighting their skulls, and like the idea that they have to put veils with their heads embroidered upon them to like make sure the body feels whole and all these other things that
Yeah.
but these are variously, they're in, or sorry, not variously, but just more concretely modern remains. So like we can be sure that these bones, more relatively sure as we can be, that these actually belong to the person in
Right.
question. The scent of roses that goes with her, as you said, like this, I do think that's a really important observation of kind of syncretic to the rose itself,
Hmm.
because she's associated with flower festivals all over the New World,
Yeah.
and they're always dealing with this kind of second half of August area
Mm.
where the height of heat waves and all these other things go, but like roses at their height, it's a blessing, right? If there's a smell there, you're talking about roses scenting the air. Well, I suppose animating during the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin, which is such an important mid-August event.
Ah.
And that this kind of the different flower festivals that are happening, there's an echo of what happened in May Day, where she's crowned with like the earliest flowers of the spring summer area,
Yeah.
like daisies and small wildflowers. But if you can afford roses, great. But by this point, there are roses. And
Yeah.
so this ushers in a different thing. This ushers in the harvest season. This ushers in the plenty as we go into another period of fasting, which is going to be Advent, uh,
Mm.
with after the harvest periods are done,
Yeah.
in the more tropical climates. And then you get this idea like, shoot, so her feast is the 23rd, 24th. However, because the church is always trying to put people on the map, as it were, to space out things, you can't compete with a saint like Saint Bartholomew.
Right.
So Saint Bartholomew's feast displaces her feast to the 30th of August, and
Hmm.
post Vatican II, it's more recognized that she's the 23rd, 24th, in the kind of traditional way here, right? So that it's more based on the death day, because if you don't want to celebrate Bartholomew, don't celebrate Bartholomew. It's fine. Um, but the fact that Rose of Lima is she's like the Ben Franklin of Peruvian currency, right? Like she's on the highest banknote.
Ah.
Uh, so this is, I don't mean Ben Franklin in the, like, the horniest of the founding fathers. Um,
No,
uh,
but about those Benjamins, yeah.
yeah, which is why he can be trusted, of course. But just this notion that she is celebrated as part of Peruvian identity
Mm.
and as part of the Hispano-Catholic identity,
Mm.
very early on. Family quarrels, florists, the people who are misunderstood for religious reasons,
Mm.
but embroiderers and lace artists
Mm.
and people against vanity, as well as 5,000 other places, all called Santa Rosa. Uh, and like that's all over the place. There's a great church in Manhattan in the 160s that I used to go to for mass for her. St. Rosa of Lima is, I think it's up near Amsterdam
Mm.
Avenue, on like 164, 165. I can't remember exactly. But it's got a big old reddish facade. It's Romanesque. I like my churches a little more Gothic, but Romanesque is lovely from the distance. But as far as these local places of power, like if you can go to a church dedicated to a saint, which is supposedly going to have relics of the saint that they're named for.
Right.
So if you're curious, and I'll betray my New York centric brain set of just letting you know where I've trod in the past. Um, but certainly she's a very popular saint, right? Like
Mm.
she's all over the place. Several places in California that I can remember. There is a festival for her in New Mexico that I have had friends send me things from, like Oaxaca
Mm.
festival for her. It's just she's a very popular saint. Um, Again, I think it helps that it's for 100 years of being able to call upon her as a saint too.
Yeah.
So I guess the curiosity out of all of that, or the thing that I guess that stands out to a natural bridge to something we're talking about, is definitely sleep deprivation.
Hmm.
And it's funny because sleep deprivation, for those that aren't aware, um, I don't know if it's so much suffering as just a series of life choices that have led to just sleep deprivation on my part. But I also know that you all have a different relationship with it, is that it's very hard for you to. We're both bad sleepers,
Yeah.
us, which means we dream big and often hallucinate. Um, so, I was told long ago that sleep deprivation was my drug of choice.
Mhm.
Uh, and so I'm fascinated by this as a type of magic, and it's rare that we go from saint to type of magic, but I think in this case it's the natural segue.
Yeah,
Um,
it makes sense. It's one of the biggest things. Yeah, she's kind of like known for specifically, and getting into the details of that is, yeah, it's really interesting. And again, as a lack rather than a thing, it's fascinating to think of as a style of magic, or a technique, or a phenomena, like through and with and of and by magical means. Yeah, my immediate thought is speaking of lack, is like what sleep deprivation isn't, which is, I can think of a bunch of like dream incubation stuff that's about disturbed sleep, right? It seems that's one of the mechanics of it, is not just putting something under your head, but putting like a rock or like something in the bed that is going to make it uncomfortable. Or
Princess and the Pea. Yeah.
yeah, or the bread that gets made, like the love divinations for bread made with handfuls of salt in it, so that you will be incredibly thirsty, and that you will supposedly see your future lover bringing you, a glass of water or something, quenching you, right? But that's not actually sleep deprivation, right? Uh, then there are like, there are a few Grimoire examples of talking about having to stay up late, whether that's like officially a vigil, or that this is a durational working, and that like this will likely lead to the appearance of spirits in the in the wee small hours, a popular time. But and again, though, there aren't necessarily always instructions to say, you must never sleep, and it seems again about drifting in and out. And so we're talking more about hypnagogic and hypnopompic stuff, or so, to consider what it is. I don't know. It feels like such an open-handed practice, right? So tool-free, that it also feels like this is, not to do that thing of like, since time immemorial, but I don't know. It does seem like maybe it could be one of the oldest forms of doing something that helps you seek the spiritual in some way. It certainly is a part of laborious, intensive ordeal stuff, even if that's not explicitly stated. Kind of
Yeah.
sacrifice of your own time, or at least temporary health, right? And I can imagine prehistoric people, deliberately keeping each other awake to see what happens, or being told that that's how you make contact with the thing in the cave, or what have you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. There's, as you said, like sleep deprivation, we're talking about taking away from something that it also has a very difficult way to determine how much you need.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep, having a contentious relationship with it and been through many sleep studies, I don't think there's a universal amount of time that people need to sleep. And then again, as someone who kind of narcoleptically falls asleep in any dark room now, or rapid REM onset, sure, yeah, I'll have a vision right away. But when I was younger, like 4 hours of sleep was all I wanted.
Mm.
I did not want more than that. And it didn't help that I heard quotes from the likes of just various modern magicians I respected, to like philosophers like Gurdjieff, who would say like sleep is wasteful if you're not doing something with it, or this idea of yoga, that if you're not using your dreams to understand lucidity, then what are you even magicking, bro? So there's also like this weird triumph that comes from it. Like you can have that attitude about anything,
Mm.
especially as a bro cultist, of like, what do you do poorer than everybody else? Like, like I don't sleep, man. But I do think like there's this thing of like, and there was an encouragement and kind of understanding of it as far as playing like the different sleep patterns and dream magics that were written about by Phil Hine and Peter Carroll with regards to like 80s, 90s chaos magic current.
Mm.
Um, but that also, there's this proposal that people need to sleep 6 to 8 hours a night.
Mm.
And like, I can't remember the last time I've ever slept 6 to 8 hours a night. And, the only difference is that, my family and friends they can tell when I'm well rested because I'm hyper. Um, but I also there's these studies that have been done that, someone who is well rested should be able to go awake for like 16 hours with before major impairments start to be noticed.
Interesting. So it's measured by how much you can not do it again.
Kind of, yeah. Like in many of these things, it's determined like how long can you stay awake. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. There are times where I've stayed awake for 3 or 4 days, which probably means I'm insane, with minimal caffeine, and just because there was something to be done. And I'll, it's the powers of hyperfocus and a deadline.
Mm-hmm.
But there's other times where I really want to stay awake and I can't. And
Yeah.
the deprivation is not a choice. It's just going, I'm going to sleep now. The body is letting me know.
Yeah.
And better to not be driving when that happens, right?
Right.
So they also
Right.
say that someone who's awake for anywhere from like 18 to 20 hours, that you start to be cognitively impaired as much as someone who is just over the border into legally drunk.
Mm-hmm.
And that being awake for 24 hours produces 4 times as many missed responses in reaction time tests, meaning that there's micro sleeps that are happening. And
Right.
they've done a lot of studies like this too, where a woman comes in, a couple comes in, and the woman says like, "I don't sleep," and the husband sleeps normally, and you found out that they actually slept the same amount of time, but she was micro napping, she was doing,
Mm.
which isn't healthy to not have it, but the body will find a way
Yeah.
to get at least certain rest, and like you can induce rapid REM through sleep deprivation over the years, because your body's like, we need to hit REM now.
Yeah.
So rather than make you hallucinate fully, it's like when you fall asleep, you will hit REM right away, instead of 10 to 15 minutes in. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of things there, and sleep studies are something that's ongoing, because this myth that everybody needs the same amount of time, that depends on your nutrition, your stress level. That
Yeah.
they say that after, like, sleep deprivation is not something you can catch up on,
Right.
supposedly, that once you have the deficit, it's always there, and that after 8 to 10 hours of sleep, which is a little bit heavier than the normal sleep load, that the damage is permanent, and that you, not that it wasn't permanent before, but that 8 to 10 hours is all you need to actually rest up. That when you sleep for 24 hours, unless it's about physical healing,
Mm.
like from an operation, or you've gotten something in your body, will often make you sleep longer, then that a lot of it is psychological.
Yeah.
And that this is one of the things that they'll use to talk about depression, right? That you sleep too much,
Yeah.
quote unquote, too much. We'll talk about Protestant work ethic another time. But any chance to knock the prots.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I mean, yeah. When you look at those studies, there's again there are all these gradations that are given as studies show objective scientific parameters on truth says talking about distinguishing sleep deprivation from sleep insufficiency. But again, that's a line that seems to change, and again, kind of suggest a one size fits all model. Looking into some of the stuff on that of the sleep study stuff around hallucination, right? Because that's where we start to think about not just impairment of cognitive faculties, not just reaction, but like what is the phenomenology of it, right? And supposedly hallucinations are one of the more common symptoms of sleep deprivation. By some of these accounts, about 80% of people hallucinate if they've been severely sleep deprived, whatever that ends up being measured as. And amongst those, supposedly like auditory forms are the most common.
yeah,
So the idea of like hearing things, and also various studies distinguish between hallucination as seeing something that isn't there and illusion, which seems far more common, which is where you think the coat rack is a lamppost or something. So there is something there, but it's not
yeah,
what you think it is, and that also feels quite dreamy in terms of like when like a place is playing another place in your head. It's like the part of a basement will be played by that weird club you're in that one time,
yeah, yeah,
or,
yeah.
or things like that. So the idea of like swapping in and out things, and that the micro sleeps start to build up, and they also there's a huge cross-firing of hypnopompic and hypnagogic hallucination, which is even more common, and is also it seems not regarded as a terribly like deep-seated pathological problem. That's partly just what the mind is doing as it falls asleep or wakes up.
Yeah. I
And
think
so,
the point what you're pointing out is really important, that this difference of hallucination has gradations. That
yeah,
it's not always Daffy Duck walks into your room and talks to you, and it rarely will be that.
right,
But that you suddenly can't tell if that's a coat or a face
right.
head, and our decision on our pattern recognition, we go into more fight or flight.
Mm-hmm.
And that seems to be the thing that happens in my experience with sleep deprivation more,
Yeah,
is that it is a skill that you can practice to remain more cogent and present during such things.
Yeah, and that's where I think it's not just about like I'm making my life hard because I'm hard, right? Or for bragging rights. Any hardship. Well, I don't any many hardships give us an opportunity to train how to work under pressure in various ways. Again, how voluntary or like how necessary that is going to depend on each person. But like the idea of being able to recognize that you are not at your best and still be able to like get a good job done in some way, like and especially that stuff of like starting to realize that you are experiencing forms of less than optimal like pattern recognition or cognitive function or
But
emotional
also sometimes
regulation.
really amazing bouts of creativity, right? And
Mm-hmm,
like,
mm-hmm.
sometimes you want the coat rack to turn into a demon.
Right.
And to be, I mean, I think that that overlap between like the gradations of hallucination and also the gradations of things like possession or spirit presence in that
Yeah.
way, that like the candle flame flickering can be a way of you to communicate, is the spirit here? So can a full-blown like Daffy Duck demon coming in and talking to you.
Yeah.
But there's gradations along the way. And so I think the sleep deprivation here in that way that alcohol can be used. But
Right.
we generally in the grimoire tradition, for the most part, we're talking about fasting and abstaining from and letting the body do this in its own way without having to seek substance, without having to do things that might impair us, where undoubtedly you will be questioned in your veracity of like, oh, you were drinking, you were
Right.
over, oh, you were on mushrooms, and that quick discounting that something can't happen to you that's very real because you're in an inebriated state. That doesn't make any sense. The real world continues, and if you believe in an invisible world, then the invisible world continues.
Yeah.
I think that there's something interesting in that the lack of inhibition that comes, the lubrication between when the slippery boundary between worlds, I suppose,
Yeah.
is important to have that parallel between hallucination as well as genuine spirit vision and interaction. And
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it isn't necessarily, or it is, I don't think it is the thing, but it can be a means to access and contain the thing. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the write-up of a review of one of my books caught a little bit of flack from a ceremonial magician because I used the word hallucinatory, and they went off on a bit of a tear about how I was psychologizing spirits, and I was betraying a materialist foundation. And do you even spirit, bro? And it was a really useful comment because it made me go back and say like, maybe I could have worded that better, but I stand by the idea that you can recognize, like you said, the invisible world of spirits as real and also the mind as real. And both of them are very, very weird. And as much as there are accounts and practices based around seeing spirits, a lot of conjuration, especially in the Grimoire traditions, is about not just seeing the spirits, but being aware that a bunch of other spirits are going to turn up for a start. So it is about caller ID to an extent, or it's about picking which one out of the multitude to turn up. But it's also very often said that when you call a spirit, some other spirits are going to turn up and make you see stuff that isn't real as well. That's why we have so many exorcisms of phantoms, right? Of the vain visions that aren't real. Like, make sure I'm seeing an accurate invisible thing, not what some other spirit is turning up. In some cases in the text to literally just annoy you, right? And so this idea that like spirits are real and they can also make you see things that aren't real is absolutely cooked into the tradition. And I think it's an it's an overcorrection to say because spirits are real, none of the psychological stuff that spirits can do matters, or we should pay any attention to. That like it's all real then, right? That's a huge pitfall to stumble into, I think.
yeah, yeah. I think the notion like we can look even biblically that even the transfiguration on the mount, which is given by many conjurers, lay workers, workers in general, as evidence of how we can talk to the dead through a Catholic lens, and it's okay, as opposed to enduring it, but enduring it. But then also what is part and parcel for the transfiguration on the mount, much like anything, is high altitude and sleep deprivation of people being sleepy. Like the Garden of Gethsemane thing of like stay awake with me, and the visions or the the sweat with blood. All these things are happening of like this is just normal, but there's also this encouraging of like dream yoga practice, which the word yoga gets overused, but that's unfortunately how it's normally called.
Mm,
Um, but the idea that you get what you practice, to
mm,
borrow the performance maxim.
mm,
And so if in your daily life you are lacking discernment and are not very good at telling the difference between projection versus um, outer versus inner stimuli versus your own projection versus mob projection versus there's something definitely off in here. Is it something about my flight or flight? What are my checks and balances right now? You
yeah,
won't be better at that when you are under stress, when you are sleep deprived, or when you
yeah,
are on a substance. You will be worse at it.
yeah.
And so part of the reason for practice or daily discipline is so that when you are met with sleep deprivation, because one of the hallmarks of sleep deprivation is people will say, I'm fine, I'm not sleepy.
Mm,
And so you have to also be recognized like, no, I'm very tired, but I'm still going to continue with this. So
mhm.
that I mean, like understanding your limitations of like, maybe you're not the one to drive,
Yeah,
but you're
yeah.
still, you'll be in the
That's the one
passenger
that.
seat
Yeah,
and have
that's
a
the one
hell of
that
a
comes up.
conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the one that comes up all the time, right? In terms of how harmful is sleep deprivation, and it seems everyone is fairly content that there aren't really any reports of people dying of sleep deprivation itself, but there are plenty of accounts of people dying in car crashes. That makes all of that stuff, operating heavy machinery, etc., like way more likely that you're going to do something daft, and it's going to be an indirect cause of death. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I think yeah, that idea that and this is hard because some people well, you teach divination, you've come across this, I know you have, of trying to get people to understand that they're not talking to God directly, and that, or to borrow a friend's quote, of like, does dial the Protestantism down right now. Uh, that we can be both accurate and also not necessarily know where our accuracy is coming from, but have a hope. We can frame that in the terms of a familiar spirit, which is why divination is looked down upon by conventional Christianity. We might say that the dead that we're talking to are demons, a lot of traditional Christianity. They might be dead, they might be angels, they might be a lot of things. But a direct access to the omnipotent, all-knowing God, or even that saints talk to people directly. Catholicism is full of this constantly,
yeah.
of people having visions of saints, but they also there's this kind of doubt that's cast upon it by the church until it's proven otherwise, right?
Right, right. And
And
there's something to that in terms of the message needing to be judged by its accuracy rather than its perceived source, right? The
yes,
the question is valid no matter where it comes from. To borrow the thing from Dark Star when the AI bomb starts to philosophize, right? Yeah.
I
Uh,
consider the source is not is we can take it to the opposite side of
mhm,
like not just to denigrate someone, but to inflate the importance of a message because it's a specific saint or angel or demon or God that we've been trying to get in touch with that says, I am this thing. How do we
right,
know that? And
right.
that testing side of things, and even testing yourself of like, how sleepy am I? Well, before I drive, let me just go sit in a dark room for 2 minutes and see if
Mhm,
I'm gonna make it. Um, and yeah, it's just discernment, testing, knowing all those things are necessary partners to sleep deprivation as an act of magic and
mm,
not just something that naturally occurs.
mm,
Because sleep deprivation will happen for everybody at some point through stress or indigestion but how do you know that the alien talking to you
yeah,
is an actual alien or at least something you can engage with and not just, an undigested piece of beef?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
and is there a difference
Right.
ultimately? And that's not to have judgment of those things, but like what's useful if you are finding yourself being further and further pulled away from society and projecting enemies everywhere you look,
Mm,
that's not a youthful vision. Wow, that's not a useful vision. And
no.
similarly, if your mission of overimportance is based upon a specific one-time vision,
Mm,
let's go the scientific room. Like, can it be repeated? Is it going to be validated? Is it something that is going to ultimately help you in your life and secure relationships and increase that kind of, at least from the very, the ways that things that we practice, that it should be increasing your equilibrium of health, harmony, happiness, money, friends. Not that those things are like destined to come to you, but that in our natural state, those things should not be hard,
right.
shouldn't be overwhelmingly difficult. And what are the blocks to getting those things? Are we in the way of ourselves? Are people in the way of ourselves? Has someone done a working on us, which in my expertise is a lot less, but still sometimes a lot more than people think. It's a weird mixture of both.
Mm,
Um, that evil eye is usually not intentional.
right.
And this kind of everybody's mostly in it for themselves and not really actively out to hurt other people. That still can be the byproduct of what they're doing, though. Anyway, that's just to say that I think to elevate sleep deprivation to a style of magic, I think there's a lot of other things that come with it,
Yeah.
that are demanded for that willful expression of I am not sleeping now. But there's also that side of it, just that like when we get a nosebleed, that the the cunning witch will make sure those tissues are stashed somewhere. And that similarly, if we find ourselves in a sleep deprived state, we may be able to harness it towards an end.
Right.
But we also have to have certain things in place in order to, I believe, make use of it past the sensorium in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. It might be a means to access, but it isn't necessarily the container itself, and it certainly can't be it certainly can't be relied on to be the thing in of itself only.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that totally makes sense. Yeah, it can be a fuel for a bunch of things, but if you don't have an engine that can take that nitro, then like, what are you doing? And again, judging it by the results, right? It's why it's, it isn't, I don't know, is it humble brag? It's not necessarily difficult to get spirits to tell you grandiose cosmic things, but if it's telling you what's going to happen in 4,000 years, like, how do you know? At what point is that going to be useful to you?
Or how the world was created, or even,
Uh-huh.
dare I say, what spirits are around you is one of the easiest readings you can give.
Mm,
Because there are spirits around everybody at all times.
right.
And some of them are there for a season or a reason, and you've got to figure that out. But
Mm-hmm.
like, that's not the hard part. People can misinterpret your genetic ancestry for a spirit guide that's
Mm-hmm.
currently around you and manifests in a way. People can misinterpret, patron spirits that you work with, especially if you're like a goetic magician, that, these could be scary things like, oh, there's a dark spirit on you. Yeah, and it's my friend.
Yeah, right.
And we have an understanding.
Yeah.
But in the same way that I would assume that if they saw an angelic spirit around someone, they'd be like, "Oh my God, there's a terrifying spirit around you."
Right. Keeps
Yeah,
telling me to not be afraid, and it's not
yeah,
working like it wants it to.
exactly. No, that's just Gabriel. Be quiet. He's cool. But the acknowledgement that your Gabriel and somebody else's Gabriel might be different Gabriels,
Right.
or
Right.
that side of it is hard. That the understanding or the kind of Protestant directive, um, in the strength of that everybody has access to divinity is there, and yet at the same time everyone has access to divinity. So
Right.
to superimpose your idea of divinity, your personal gnosis, and make it oppressively the universal gnosis, this is where conflict starts, and it never ends well.
No, no. And ideally, like, that's not saying you shouldn't try and pursue spirits that give you a grand cosmic purpose or something. Quite the opposite. But is it actually folded into meaning for you? And if it is, if you have made some kind of contact with the Godhead itself, like, shouldn't that spur you to like try and do well with it and acknowledge, a bunch of your own at least potentials to misuse that. Shouldn't there be some humbling quality of that as well as some like, potential for ego inflation?
Yeah.
Shouldn't there? Couldn't one say? Shouldn't one say? Um, oughtn't we? I don't know.
That's more British than I usually am. So, um,
So yeah, like it feels it feels like yeah, another kind of demon that can be put to good work, or at least something daimonic that we need to be aware of for its potential to unbalance as much as push us in the way that we might want to go.
yeah. I'm curious. Well, part and parcel from I remember there's take a shot if you know who I'm talking about. But there's one specific goetic manual of the 90s where it specifically says, and this is because you have the push towards the psychological model being so prominent, with like Duquette and others saying that like, everybody's born with a 72 pack of demons in their head.
Mm.
And also at this time, like the sole representation of goetic demons being the Solomonic Ars Paulina, like here's 72 demons.
Mm.
and the list is sacrosanct, and it fits right into the Shamhamparash, and like everything goes just the way it needs to go.
Right.
In that lovely way that we know that only systems that have been around a while and are refined reflect such perfection. Uh, and so
That's
that's the whole,
sarcasm.
yeah, yeah. And well, or even the sense of like it's edited, right? Like and like that, like from a linguistic perspective, like the more simple a language is, like we have this idea that Neanderthal language, or like the further we go back, the language is going to be incredibly simplified, and it's actually usually quite the opposite. The
Yeah.
languages are refined, vocabulary might increase, but grammar and syntax and things like this get refined over the years.
Mm.
Um, and this is certainly the case in every major language family we know. The more
Mm.
complex, quote unquote, a language, the more cases it has, usually the older it is.
Yeah.
Um, and there's also that maxim that all languages are equally old because they've all evolved from each other. Even fabricated languages are coming out of what we know of existing languages. So like, yes, it's new, but it's still based in older things. So
Yeah.
linguistics is fun. And linguistic talk is awesome. But okay, so looking at that, there was a certain author who was protesting the over psychologization of goetic demon work, and said that they needed to be manifest into physical appearance in order to prove that you were doing the work.
Yeah.
And it was, I happen to have a nice hardback version of that particular manual. But it's interesting here because I think in dealing with we don't often deal with the 72 unless there's a direct overlap, like some of the higher up kings, right? If we're
Mm.
dealing with Baal, Payman, and Gop and things like this, where we might mention them in a cross reference because they seem to have implanted their family seed across the trees of the various
Yeah.
Goetic.
Yeah.
But it's rare that we focus on one of the 72.
Mm.
And so it's interesting to look at Stolas here as a demon. I believe 36 of 72 in the conventional list.
Mhm.
36, 26, right? 36 demon has 26 legions.
Yeah.
So there's and this physical appearance side, I think, is coming out of this discussion of sleep deprivation too, for me, that like a darkened room and a candle and like a mirror, if we're going to follow the very 90s, like um Astaroth. Poke Runyon. I love him. That's still a wonderful video, a couple of videos. But uh, Dear Stolas, the 36 of the 72 Spirit of Solomon. Wow, I'm a 90s kid. I do think that there's a lot of dependency upon in California, which because you can take the boy out of California, but on pot use, on sleep deprivation, on environmental consideration to allow
Mm.
for misinterpretation or interpretation, all around miss in parentheses, and Mr. Interpretation of various signs in the room as a presence of a spirit, especially in a dark mirror, which in the
Yeah.
90s was still being in that like the enforcement, the triangle is outside the circle,
Yeah.
and then anything that somebody suggests otherwise is playing with fire, and
Mhm.
that offerings should not be made, even though the certain entries specifically say you have to offer blood for the spirit to appear. Um,
Mhm.
and
Or
that
even give them gifts if they've turned up on time and in a fashion that isn't disruptive. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to consider all these things of like staging it so that you get a result, like increasing the means by which you might get a result
Yeah.
of like, is it the Fox sisters wrapping their knuckles under the table to prove? And who's to say that Mr. Splitfoot didn't work through their conscious deception of other people? Is Santa a singular entity or a force that possesses parents and tells them to spend a lot of money on their children? I don't know. So I think anyway, Stolas. Um, I know what I know from the McGregor Mathers very well published Barnes and Nobly Accessible grimoire. 36 Spirit, great and powerful prince, appearing in the shape of a mighty raven at first before the exorcist, but after he taketh the image of a man, he teacheth the art of astronomy and the virtues of herbs and precious stones. He governs 26 legions of spirits.
Mhm.
His seal is this. Um,
Mhm.
and you get the lovely McGregor Matthews thing where the name is conveniently put around the sigil, which is actually really lovely to consider. Like,
Yeah, it's pretty
in case
handy.
your notes get a little funky, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that there's Colin de Plancy puts out because the original the Pseudomonarchia Daemonorum was 1583, right? Johann Weir is that he's a great prince in the form of a night raven.
Yeah,
So not necessarily raven, but nyctocoracis.
yeah,
So this term night raven comes up because this has been the description. Like you get this wonderful woodcut of an owl with irregularly long legs. It
yeah.
is
I've
like
said before I don't normally like the Duplancy images, but even that one, I'm like, no,
it's
come
so
on,
cute.
it's awesome. Yeah, it is
But
awesome.
this idea of what a night raven is that Duplancy says that night raven is another term for owl. Night raven is also a classification of several other animals, including some people use the term for a nightjar,
Hmm.
and which certainly, if you know what a nightjar is, they're certainly scary little beings.
Hmm.
And then also that there's the actual Nyctocorax like Latin name that has been given since Linnaeus of the night herons, which are
Yeah.
their own weird versions. Like they do look like ravens. They make a crow-like call, not a raven
Hmm.
like call, a crow, and that they have black on their heads and they're white. So there's this belief that folklorically that night herons are actually descendants of ravens in the way that ravens were originally white in Greek mythology and were punished by Apollo.
Yeah.
The ones were the most true were the ones that appeared at night in this white form, because
Hmm.
there is this kind of leaning back to that. So you have several options for what a night raven is and how it's related to an owl. It can also just be a description because who the fuck knows at this point. But
Right.
what we do know is that Stolas likes avian forms, and then he becomes a man and teaches you astronomy and herbs and stones, which is like this is the most wonderful 90s new age witchy spirit there is. Like, right, you get a little birdie totem,
Hmm.
and he'll teach you what the like as far as if I were to have a new age store or a metaphysical store, I'd be like, I would just put a little stuffed little owl with a crown there with his long legs and like all the precious stones at his feet and little jars of herbs when you make your spell pouches.
Heck yeah.
See in the malls now, in stores that are not magic stores at all, that are fascinating to me. Um, that how far we've come since the 80s. But yeah, so I figured I'd go off on my spillage of what I know. I think Stolas is a lovely little demon.
Hmm.
I I know we don't always reveal personal work so much, but Stolas I think is one that many people have brought into practice, tried to seek alliance with.
Yeah.
And specifically, I think that woodcut is responsible for that, is that it makes him seem unthreatening.
Mm.
Um, and which is ironic because owls are nasty little creatures.
Right. Right.
And ravens aren't any better. And I don't the way that these well certainly a nightjar is terrifying,
Yeah.
and the night heron also not looking like it's going to like me very much. All dinosaurs. Um, but there is something about Stolas, and there's even Stolas memes, right? Of that we've
Hmm.
that go around. But the description of it is very short,
Hmm.
unlike his legs. So I would be curious what you might be able to bring in past the the Dictionnaire Infernal and the Pseudomonarchia Demonorum and MacGregor Mathers transcribed by the hand of a dead man, not translated as was recently pointed out in a
According to ancient manuscripts. Yeah.
yes,
Hmm.
um, but plagiarized. Um, but yes, what else are we? What am I missing about Stolas?
What else are we? Yeah, what else are we looking at? So for a start, yeah, like in terms of Night Raven, there is one other part that I think is worth exploring at least a little bit, which is one of the things that a Night Raven also might be, especially if we start with the German, which again Vaya kind of is soaked in, is the Nachtgraber, right? It's Night Raven, which is yeah, nocturnal birds, especially such as owls or herons, but is also relates to a bugbear creature, not a long-armed D&D monster, but a general thing that is talked about to kids to scare them. A bogeyman, the Knapcrap, which is a being you find talked about in Austria and especially the south of Germany, and it seems to be linked to Norse mythology. Again, all the words are just the regional or the particular language's term for a night raven. It's a full on kind of like scary cryptid type thing. It's depicted as often having no eyes, but like this huge screaming maw. It's said to have holes in its wings, which cause illness and disease if looked at. And so there is this kind of like scary element to this thing that we can also find. And it also highlights that while theologically spirits called demons found in the early modern Goetias are, you know, canonically a variety of fallen angels, and there's also some ideas of restitutionism. Some of them, it's even said like you can motivate them by saying you'll help them kind of regain their throne in some way, or stick it to God because they're, you know, disgraced nobles that are still mad about it. But there's also this sense that if we look at it folklorically, the 72 especially is a grab bag of European folklore over the last, you know, 2 millennia, if not longer. You know, there are similarly, there are like siren and mermaid spirits that aren't specifically linked to, you know, a particular naiad in Hellenistic mythology, but are like seem to be based in, at some point in like some take on regional stuff. And of course, those two overlap with like Messulinae and things like that, and other like. But there is a sense that these are not just a cast of fallen angels or things that have always been in hell. There is that sense of a bunch of spirits that no one's quite sure what to do with end up coming into there. And so we see, like, again, because this is such a prevalent, to return to the nat crap, that there's such a prevalence of it that you do get a variety of forms of them. You get the Wutenda nat crap, which is literally the angry night raven, which is a bit less common, but instead of abducting children, which is the other thing that the usual one does, that's why we tell kids, you know, what gets classed as like a cautionary being. That one doesn't so much kidnap children as just scare them, especially into silence. Which again, if we look at the context of what's going on in the office, the spirit turns up flappy and potentially disruptive and scary, and it is through understanding that conjuration isn't just calling a spirit, it's also hiring spirits. And one of the ways that you hire a spirit is to get it to occupy a form that you can talk to. There is this like outer reflecting the inner, that we aren't just asking spirits to turn up in a beautiful or comely form for the eye candy of it. It's so that they can speak with a human tongue and can, you know, appear as pleasant so that we can have a pleasant conversation. And so this idea of, yes, we can talk about like, I have bound the spirit into, you know, I've dominated it with my will so that it appears in the way that I want it to appear, and I'm the top now. But there's also a sense of binding as just giving it a job, right? Of charging it, of getting to a point where it's not flitting around the room, that it is perceivable or even tangible is maybe not quite the right word, but that it is coherent, right, in form and in communication and in function. And you do see other forms of the night raven, the good night raven, the Gute Nachtrat, which is a lot rarer, but like in Burgenland myth, it's a bird that enters kids' rooms so it can gently sing them to sleep. And isn't that nice? So like, yeah, there's some elements where it might be a bit more folkloric. And again, there's all the Nick Korak stuff of like, we can wander into earlier forms of what's corvid and what isn't, what's a specific. And again, this brings up, like you say, Linnaeus and various ways of trying to categorize physical as well as animal spirits.
Which just I do a pet peeve is using Latin names for things to justify folklore older than the 18th century.
Yeah.
And it drives me crazy because we're talking 1760-ish.
That's it's putting the cart before the horse, right?
Like, yeah, and like it's
attribution.
And this is not like again, we can talk botanical berries all day long, but there's thousands of years of history of what we might call a berry. And just because berry is botanically classified differently scientifically does not mean that berry lore is now extinct, that it doesn't have an effect. And go on, I just putting it out there that like I'm a big Linnaeus fan, but like come on, as long as you don't capitalize the second, like please stop capitalizing
unforgivable
yeah, unless it comes from a proper name like Salix Babylonica, you know, it should be lowercase. And it was a lot like anyway.
So there is a fairly old idea that the etymology, like, or at least the perceived etymology of corvus is from the animal naming itself, that
Yeah.
it's corvus,
Yeah.
and I like that because it gives an explanation of why that gets applied to especially crows and ravens, but we can also bring in various others, European jays, rooks, which are also a part of the Stolas story, I think, or at least can be. And so I like the idea of it's that which cause, which doesn't. Yeah, I like it because it means that we're not saying that prior to the 18th century, no one knew the difference between a raven and a crow, right?
Yeah.
That's not like that's not a useful way of thinking about things. That's an enormous condescension of history.
Well,
Um,
it's also, I think, when we're talking about a dissemination of knowledge across even a relatively small geographical area like Greece, that common parlance is things translate, that we already know that the gods themselves in record, that Athena is different in one area, that Zeus is different in another area, and that its thunder gods are unified under the banner of Zeus, and a collective mythology is developed and promulgated primarily by poets, right? That they're
mm,
unifying mythology by creating their own things that are memorized and popularized. The mimetics of unification, the mimetics of doctrine, even in this way.
right.
But the fact that we know that like night raven is used by Aristotle just to mean a bird of ill omen,
Yeah.
like maybe an owl, maybe a crow, like something that's off-putting. And so it's less about specificity and more about what is this in your area. If we
Yeah.
talk about the baying of dogs when you invoke Hecate, like is that domesticated dogs? Is it coyotes? Is it wolves? What if you have neither coyote or wolf in your area? What is a dog for you? And
Yeah.
that adaptation of things through the local, spirit of the land,
Hmm.
the the Gina Loci, like this is important as well. That this
Yeah.
interpretation of things, that words are containers for meaning, not meaning in and of themselves. And that this thing can also be filled and influenced, like a plant will act differently depending on where it's planted, not just from its the longitude and latitude, but just there's so many factors that go into it, and words need to be kept alive and understood as living things in that way.
I
So
love
night
that.
raven can mean many things by
Yeah.
nature. It has to.
Yeah, and it's not just picking one and saying that that's the true meaning, and you're
Yeah.
not you're not half-assing it by being like, well, the bird that is black in my area that came through when I was doing that was this. Like, yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love that. That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
There's also because I'm not familiar with the Nachtkrap until you brought it up. It sounds like this is might be a wider Scandi German thing because there's and I can't remember where I heard the damn song, but there was I remember it, who knows in my own mind, of Bjork singing on some pseudo documentary. Maybe it was one about her music, maybe it was something else about the raven. Maybe it's from the juniper tree. I don't remember. But the raven with the sack upon his back, who
Hmm.
will hear his call to the children small? Skra, skra, in the sack, never to come back, which is totally Nachthrap. It's a
Yeah.
raven that's going around and putting children in his bag to take them away.
Hmm.
So I,
Hmm.
I just a little. I'll have to Google where the fuck that comes from because I don't think I made it up. But if I did, Bjork is really poetic in my head.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful. I love
yeah,
that. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And proud German tradition of well, proud European tradition of scaring the crap out of kids, right? Um, there are some people that have tried to link in pursuing that a little bit to why that form in terms of the folkloric bogeyman to connection to rooks specifically, which had particularly big like infestations across all of Central Europe. And there is a lot of English lore I'm like passingly familiar with about rooks and about how to keep a rookery, which is not a million miles away from things like the Raven to the Tower of London, and the idea
uh,
again of linking the birds not just to general augury or to being ominous, but to the particular fortunes of a place. So there may be something to that. Yeah, I think it's worth bearing in mind. The broader sense of like looking for which birds it could be in the world is also kind of mirrored when we start to look through the earlier Grimoiric record as well. So the easiest thing to say about Stolas is that he proceeds, comes after, both the mention of Stolas in the French Book of Spirits, Livre d'Esprits, and also Mistolas or Mistalas in the Book of Offices in Folger VB26, which is published as the Book of Oberon. So and looking through, say, Jake's Pandemonium, he specifically links them. Distolas is a great marquis who appears in a beautiful form and responds willingly to what one asks and commands him, and he brings stones if one commands him, which seems to be a link back to, I mean, there's a bunch of things that bring you stones, but there is a specific mystery secret in one of the books of secrets attributed to Albertus Magnus about how ravens can fetch a stone specifically that brings their eggs that have cooked in the sun too hard back to life. It uncuddle, what's the word they use? I forget, it's a weird word that used to mean boiled, but looks like it means like the opposite. But it's a stone that revives the cooked chicks. It's part of a wider thing I think you can trace with ravens and their associations with the sun, and crucially with mitigating the excesses of the sun's virtue. They're very connected to like curing gout, like the king's disease, and to in various ways like mitigating or regulating the arrogance of solary spirits and things like that. So there's a little reference there. Distolas isn't explicitly mentioned as appearing in a particular form, but the Livre of Spirits doesn't really do that. They also said to give the master a horse that carries them in 1 hour, 100 or 200 or 300 leagues or more. And so there's this like emphasis on a lot of the bird clan spirits as carriers. And in that case, the earlier form seems to be that they can carry, or they can give the magician means to be carried as well as carrying. And then by the time you get to the Book of Offices, Mistalas is under Paimon in the west, and appeareth like a night raven. Although he also receiving man's shape, he had the power to teach and instruct one, specifically in witchcraft and necromancy, and to know the virtues of herbs, stones, and indeed trees. And so that one seems a pretty, that seems to be where we're getting Stolas from, I would say. There are other raven spirits in the Goetias, if we want to use that term with a small g, including, of course, Cain, and probably Zame, who carries things from the king's house. And that Cain is also linked to, with a K, is also linked to Cain with a C, and with Caim, which also seems to be pretty explicitly drawing on the Abrahamic mythology that it was a corvid that teaches Adam to bury Abel, that Adam sees the raven burying one of its kind and says, I shall do as the raven does. And so the raven's said to, or the crow in some translations, is said to teach. And in some cases, that's said to be Cain returning and trying to repent in some way. So we have that lovely bit of lore. Cain is also probably Cameo, the spirit, and also Tame in Sloane 3824, who is typically listed as a thrush, but sometimes as a black bird, not a blackbird, one word, but quite categorically a bird that is black. So again, is that a blackbird, or is that, again, just like potentially any bird that's black? But Jake also ends up connecting Cain to Raim, or Raum, as they're better known, who, again, canonically later on turns up as a crow, and they can both carry things, especially carrying things out of the king's house is mentioned a lot, and also destroy cities, which is, fun. And it was Jake's sort of opinion that Cain was probably originally one spirit with several different offices. Raums or Raim seems to be a duplicate or a ghost, as Jake slightly unhelpfully phrased them. There are ghosts in grimoires. I know, Jake. No, I mean ghosts. No, I know. No, I mean duplicates that then take on a life of their own, a shell that is filled. So there's also finally, off the back of Rain, to just kind of finish up this sort of adumbration of the night birds in the Goetias. There's also Malapas in the Book of Offices, who's under a Maimon in the southern court, and takes on that city destroying property of subverting and overthrowing all manner of buildings and edifices, I think it says as well. So there's a bunch of things going on there. but it seems crucially that like Distolas, it gets referenced as Mistolas and ultimately as Stolas. Now, these days, I think if you called them separately, they're going to turn up separately. But I think that's a good context for the Grimoire record itself, for Stolas, and kind of mixes this sense of carrying not just physical things or money. Again, like looking at corvids and what they're actually capable of, that would make sense to me. You can train an actual like raven to go and steal actual money from people and bring it back to you. But also the sense of bringing you the knowledge of herbs and stones, as well as a stone that a particular stone that it's known to carry and bring on occasion that has properties we could definitely call necromantic. So there's a kind of a complex of things going on there. But agreed. I think Stolas, in my experience, is can put on a friendlier face than I think some of the others. Yeah.
I mean, that brings us into even just well, politics as a larger understanding that includes public image and perception and the manipulations that go with that. That like Stolas has good marketing. That image is just much better marketing.
Yeah.
You look at Bale, it's sexy and it's hot, but like not necessarily one you just want to like hang out with. There's other ones in there that you come to Ashtaroth and it's like okay, and just anyway, Stolas is damn cute and comes up a lot, and the memes are funny.
Yeah.
Also, I think it's interesting teaching the uses of precious stones and herbs and astrology. You are using a book to conjure a demon that can also give you information on things you could study. So is it in the, I guess on the practical level, there is one interpretation of this that you will kind of get downloads of things that are already available to you, and the knowledge you're taught will somehow be validated by the fact that it can be understood, and that also speaks to the level of complexity that astrology is.
Yeah.
But also the point that I think more in my understanding of how spirits usually work is that not given a list of correspondences that it can tell you what this specific stone can do, what this herb can do, that may not necessarily agree with other people's populated lists, and perhaps teach how to analyze and look at stones and herbs specifically, or once you understand the keys behind astrology and its angles and what those means, that you don't necessarily need to look up every single thing, because you can now have extrapolative thought and have your system, the memories and the new neuron pathways to understand that you can kind of generate some of this information through interpretation and this inspiration or direct wisdom you've received from Stolas.
Yeah.
So, and I think that goes to many discussions about these demons in the sense of like, are they subtle or are they very explicit in their teachings? And I think yes. And, let's go off the improv rule. So I suppose in the manner of trying to understand a stone specifically that is not as many ancient ascriptions to it. Let us consider selenite.
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
And where that goes.
Well, where it starts is it's the stone of Selene, right? It's a moonstone or a moon goddess stone. That's from Pliny, who also calls something that might be it, and this is where we have to start like either squinting or stopping squinting. Lapis specularis, or even lunarius, or even the lapis lunae. Again, it gets called moonstone a lot, and the biggest overlap there is with what we call moonstone, like today, or is classified today. So selenite today, the transparent gypsum crystals, an old name as well for like calcium sulfate, whereas what we call moonstone is typically a chatayant or an iridescent feldspar of various kinds. But moonstone historically is again, it's a description. It's a job description. It's not necessarily a geological definition. Could be any of the other chatayants like cat's eye or opal. Added to that complexity is how people describe the stone of the moon. So it's known as the moon stone, but say Damigeron says it's likened to jasper, which means, especially the Persian varieties of it, supposedly, which gets repeated on via Marbodius Marbon as meaning green, as we've talked about with Jasper and its links to being the green guy. So that's why Albertus seems to be trying to navigate a bunch of things when he says, the first thing he says about it is like, it is of varying reports when he's talking about selenite. And again, there's also spelling, a lack of spelling standardization going on here. He mixes in a lot of lore about chelonite or Kelontes or Celontes. So again, there's like some similar sounding words as well. There's a mouthfeel going on there. And it's here that we can also kind of say, well, if they're all stones of the moon, right? If that's what is going on, it's not that it just sounds like a moonstone, or they have two completely different functions. They don't necessarily. It isn't just that everyone is mistaking it for the feldspar moonstone, I don't think. There's a bunch of other things that they might be mistaking it for as well. But there is a commonality of lore around all stones associated with the moon. The most typical is that it itself, at least in its growing, waxes and wanes with the moon, that it is varying colored. The speculum lapidum says that it contains within it the image of the moon or of a clouded star, as well as saying that specifying that it glitters in the dark. Albertus also goes on to give it a bunch of different colors, which again seems to be some chelonite or Kelontes or even the jasper influence there. He says it can be red or white or purple, and you do get different colors of what we now call selenite as well. One of the other main things that you get along with the waxing and waning, and speaking of discernment and divination to help you actually do stuff aptly, Albertus describes the details of this divination by putting it under your tongue. He says that by thinking about doing an undertaking, you will have this realization. He says, if the thing should be that you are considering, should I do a thing or not? If it should be, the heart is seized with a firm conviction that cannot be shaken off. But if it should not be, the heart immediately recoils from it. And we see that repeated both in terms of the waxing and waning, and also for putting it in the mouth to work out what you should do in the speculum lapidum, which frames it as the mouth, which has to be washed with water first. It says that it specifies that if it's in a waxing moon, it can help with tuberculosis. And there are some like medical things that seem pretty consistent as well. Helps with consumption and with a bunch of other languid conditions, which again suggests the phlegmatism of the moon and its stones. But if it's waning, so the stone itself doesn't just grow by the moon, it itself might shrink or increase in size or potency or change in potency, is when it's waning that it's foretelling the future. And he repeats that it will make a man think about those things he should be doing and those he should not, which is that's even less like divination, right? That's more just like self-reflection. He says that if it's the former, it will be exactly impressed in the mind. If you should be doing it, you'll be thinking about it more clearly. And if you shouldn't be doing it, the fancy of it, the rumination on it will quickly leave the mind. So we also have this sense of it like not just telling you things, but encouraging your either resolve or self-correction, I guess would be the other way of putting it. There are, again, a bunch of overlaps. We might call them confusion with things for moonstone, what we call moonstone specifically, and other stones of the moon. They safeguard pregnancy and give easier labor and birth. They protect sailors. They protect thieves as well, other people that work by the night. They can reconcile lovers or even inspire love. They can reduce swellings Again, a kind of phlegmatic thing of like the cooling nature of stuff. They can grant peace and harmony. They can heal lunatics, most specifically, right? And also said that they
Only
can,
Catholic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that they can, if, especially if it's in a ring, can bring divine inspiration as well as like honors and things like that, which seems as linked to people thinking of you at night, as like both the luminaries have this quality of being good for promotions, but in different ways. Either you're a big shiny solar example of someone dazzling or brilliant, or maybe yeah, you're someone that people think of at night. In a helpful way. Apparently, if one or more of these stones of the moon are enclosed in gold with parsley, it's said to make bees fertile as well, which is a fun one.
Oh, that's fun. I like
Yeah,
that. A
yeah,
little more
yeah,
stressed out by the hives.
yeah.
I'm
So
curious
that,
too. It's interesting with all the ascriptions to like selenite specifically by more New Age ascription.
yeah.
Uh, it is across the board like promotes clarity, promotes peace and calm. It is in Catholic gemology associated with Saint Clare, whose feast is also
Ah,
August the 11th, and I think that echoes the rays and the clarity of which
mm-hmm,
selenite is supposed to promote. It's
mm,
an elevating stone. It's a stone that's said to, when it's put with other stones, increases their effectiveness and
mm,
ability to it removes impediments to those stones' missions. So
mm.
it's very self-sacrificing, I guess, in that way, or just by its nature, it strengthens the effect of other gems.
Clarifies, yeah.
Yeah, it vibrates at such a high frequency. And the clarifying is obviously, I think, why it's associated with Claire. And
Mm-hmm,
that is like that pun in our Western European languages is there always with
mm-hmm,
Saint Clair. But connection, camaraderie, that it promotes a unification of mission and purpose, and that many New Age workers will use selenite. Again, betraying my 90s roots here, but like if you have a bunch of gemstones working together, selenite might be added last and like specifically spoken over it with the moisture of the mouth touching it because it does dissolve, quote unquote, in water. It doesn't do it fast. It's not like an instant, like, it's not a raccoon with cotton floss,
Oh.
but it does chip away more easily and dissolves because it is, it's the remnants of salt water. So like I really love the selenite forms in things like desert rose, which usually you
Mm.
tend to see barite desert roses sold more, but there's something a little bit even more delicate to the specifically the selenite.
Yeah, they're gorgeous. Yeah.
And so I have more in my exposure and in person, barite roses because that's what's more commonly available. But desert roses just being really beautiful to look at. These idea of flower-like things that are encased in stone that are found in the desert, uh,
Mm.
anywhere from like Tunisia to Oklahoma, both of which are prevalent with them, and speak to ancient seafloors,
Mm.
really what it is. But sand roses and desert rose itself is just such a lovely lore behind it and that kind of frozen in time idea. It's intimately connected with Jinn lore
Mm.
when it comes to the Sahara, and it is connected supposedly to like the martyrs that have paved the way before you in American folklore that I can tell that like
Mm.
coming across Desert Rose means that like Christians have been there before you and are telling you that this land is okay. Like
Right.
keep your faith, keep manifesting destiny in that lovely American ideal. Um,
The thing, yeah, the thing along the roadside, right? You get that with the Rose of Jericho as
uh
well a lot, right? There's some Magi law specifically about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, it's been here before, and it's a thing that's been left before. Interesting. Yeah, 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 yeah. Pilgrimage and the idea of re-remembering things.
Yeah. And
Huh.
speaking of remembering things, I find it, I forgot to mention the flower of the day, and I'm not sure if I have research on the rose, but I'm not sure if you researched the rose as well. For today, I realized that Herb got left off on our noble rose list.
Oh no.
But I have some folklore collected on the rose, and it might be worth a visit
Sure.
here because the rose is such an important flower, it's hard to not sing of its importance, right?
Yeah.
And there's like it because of its virtue as a Christian symbol, like it's so still allowed to have folklore that expands. Not everything that was enfolded and like put under the umbrella or the skirts of Christianity kept so much of its folklore, but the rose as kind of queen of flowers certainly has.
Hmm.
Um, so I think there's quite a bit on the rose, and it's not just yes, Rose of Lima, but I think there's also something to some of these overlapping themes that happen. They're as far as we can tell, these are Persian, Azerbaijani like valleys where these roses, which are related to apples, is where they come from. But because that's such a central location, like everybody claims this kind of inheritance of roses, right? Divinities themselves are intimately connected to roses.
Mm.
Um, Lakshmi was said to be created out of 108 large and 1,008 small rose petals. That I believe like many other strong smelling plants, and because we know that it's what's the lore, 77 or 72 roses to make a single drop of rose oil. The
Right.
distillation of the rose scent is um, highly uh, lusted after that to have such purity in it that one drop can be used to scent many things because it's so potent and so strong.
Mm.
But we know that in the Iliad, rose oil is used to anoint the body of Hector. You see it in Egyptian tombs that rose balm anoints the dead, and dried petals are inserted in between the layers of the linen wraps of mummies. And so it this constant smell of life that is guaranteed by this, that we have the miracle of the roses with Rose of Lima, of like roses falling from the sky, which might actually be more of a metaphor of the fact that the whole city smelled like roses at this time, and this is a common smell associated with saints, is specifically
Yeah.
described as either the warmth of roses or the cloying nature of lily and ylang ylang and like jasmine, but or those smells combined, which honestly smells like a funeral. Our funeral wreaths are still those strong smelling florals, which of course are originally to kind of subvert the miasma and the effluviance of the dead in
Right.
that. Aphrodite is associated with roses. The sea foam that springs from where the balls of Uranus fall, that the foam that she comes out of turns to white roses, and we see that translation of white roses specifically into things like influences in Kimbanda, where white roses are associated with the kingdom of the beach, and this kind of Venus on the half shell devil lady that is the form of Rainha da Praia, Rainha das Praias, the queen of the beaches, takes white roses in that way. And it's like it's all linking to this greater folklore that's being brought in from all over the place.
Yeah.
Uh, but that when she was pursuing Adonis, she cut her feet on rose thorns, and this is where red roses were born from. So roses were originally white in their purity of her birth, the purity of love, and that the lust itself creates this red rose in mirror of that
Mm.
lust she had for Adonis.
Mm.
That Flora creates the body of a rose from a nymph in Roman myth, and that all of the gods added life and nectar and scent and fruit to the flowers. Um, the arrows of Cupid's bow, the actual heads are said to be rose thorns. And so here we know his issuance from Venus, but also in larger Greek myth that Eros is one of the primal forces of the universe, right? That was always there. That gets kind of reborn through this classification of the noose of the noose, right? We're talking about broad concepts, but then we're talking about personalities that come in later. Um,
Yeah.
but that also, in return for keeping Venus's lovers' locations and identities secret, the flower is gifted to Harpocrates, the god of silence, or the notion of silence, the numen of silence. And this term god is always a weird thing because it kind of anthropomorphizes things so quickly. But
Oh,
this is
but
a
here we have but here we have like the beginnings of Sub Rosa as well.
exactly. The
Hmm.
rose is associated with silence as it is as much as it is love. And
Mm.
that silence and love in their way meet their place in death.
Mm.
That this is the silence of the dead, but our love for the dead and how it goes. So
Mm.
this the silence and the secrets that come there, the idea of being under the rose, sub rosa, as you said, you can see that in courtrooms, in banquet rooms, in grand residences, in places where lovers have trysts. This idea of creeping roses or roses that are there, the infertile rose or the tea rose and things like this that we use in in substitution for true rose, the War of the Roses,
Hmm.
and how things go. That white roses do represent innocence and purity and honesty and the faithful wife, and that red roses tend to represent rage and passion. That the red roses echo the thorn just as much as they do the scent.
Mm,
And that there's these varying levels of what color roses might you use, including down to the fabled black rose, which is really just the darkest and darkest reds, which is associated with Saint Barbara, for instance,
mm,
specifically in the New World. You have the painting the roses red, where the in Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, he's come up twice now in the past two podcasts. But the Queen of Hearts and the gardeners painting the white roses red, which is a token of the passion there, right? This is
mm.
we're going from Alice's innocence to like encountering the Queen, who is the embodiment of passion in that way. In addition to all of these things that go in, I think just sent you the meme that was on St. Patrick and the folklore around St. Patrick. And this has nothing to do with roses, but it's the quick interjection here of Patrick noticing two giants coming and seeing demons around them, and so he takes the demons off of them, and these pagan giants, he's trying to figure out stories of history and things here, and then he worries that maybe learning the pagan history of Ireland is detrimental to his good job as a Christian proselytizer. And the giants inform him that like, no, 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 whatever's good we'll go into the new ways, and whatever's bad is going to be forgotten. And I love the kind of way of basically saying like whatever pagan survives is fine.
Yeah.
Is it was what I got from it. Others are getting that like, don't worry, the bad parts of paganism are gone. And we're not pagan, we're Christian. But what I see in that is, we will continue.
If it works, it stays.
Yeah, if it works, it stays. If it works, it's a saint in the Mexican pop,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting to that with a lot of the symbolism of the rose turning into Christianity and the passion that we talk about, rather than it being lust or desire or anger, that it is often we see this in the Passion of the Crucifixion, that the red roses are directly responsible for or a response to Christ's blood, and in some versions of the myth being that red roses are created at the crucifixion,
Mhm.
along with many other plants, being Golgothite plants. So the rose is quintessential Golgothite plant, in addition to the rose being Christ's blood that is both human and divine at the same time. This goal of the magician or the worker to be a vessel in this way, that the man at the center of the crossroads of verticality and horizontality, that rose that is the rosy cross, right?
Yeah.
There's something there that is the to know, to dare, to will, and to be silent is all symbolized in that rose.
Yeah.
And that there's also this side of like um, the name of the flower actually describes a pink color now, which is interesting because we have yellow roses, but we usually go through the like white to red combination thing that happens
Spectrum. Yeah.
here, like the innocence to the passion here. And yellow roses end up being either friendship or like a more charitable, or what do you call it, a charismatic love. It's not a platonic love. It is a platonic love. It's not a physical love with yellow roses,
Yeah.
but then yellow roses in like a larger macumba tradition have association with the dead and the power of magic and the dead. Um,
Mm.
and like the what is the yellow rose versus the white rose versus the red rose. And I think it's interesting within like within Kimbanda, of course, the red rose is the par excellence, the symbol of the Encruzilhadas kingdom, the kingdom of the crossroads,
Yeah.
with all of its beauty and all the things that allure, which we would normally associate with kingdoms like the Praia, the beach, and Lira, the harp, because of the attractiveness. But the thing that is the red rose and all of its power and glory as a thing with thorns as well is, this Rosa Vermelha is associated very heavily with the Queen of the Seven Crossroads and the spirit of the crossroads in general, the
Yeah.
spirits and the kind of numen of the crossroads. That the red rose is their token flower and belongs truly to all things that are called Eshu and Pombagira within a Macumba context. Uh,
Right, right. Let alone that, the compass rose or the Rosa dos Ventos, right? The
yeah,
the rose of the winds is how we navigate. It is a crossroads that we overlay onto not just a map, but like where we stand.
yeah,
And so those concepts of like choice and agency and development and moving forward are all tied to that sense of navigation by a thing that gets called a rose.
yeah. I think it's also when I think of rose specifically, in addition to like the blood of Christ, it's also important to kind of go back one step and look at Mary as a figure, as being the heavenly rose,
Mm,
um, and just even the notions of um, uh, rose by its nature is generally feminine in its kind of connotation, I would say,
Yeah.
in our parlance, our interpretation of it, and that like any powerful saint, like we talked about, like Mary of Egypt, is described as like a desert rose.
Yeah.
Literally, is the scent of on the wind that we smell. Which this unwashed, unkempt woman who's wandering around naked with leathery skin and her hair like in sandy dreads, smells like roses, and
Mm,
we smell her holiness like roses. That this smell that we associate with saints is again this rose smell. And
mm,
then Mary herself, this garland of roses that becomes the rosary. It is meant to be as if you are giving a bouquet of roses. That
mm,
the smell of prayer itself is likened to roses to the God, to
mm.
God, to the saints, and that we get this idea too of like carrying smells near your face. I think directly of in Mexico, it would have been something like crowflower, which is plumeria, frangipani, which was held before the face to kind of radiate your face, your countenance, so that you were holier and higher rank than you were. That in order to speak to higher people of higher rank, you held plumeria in front of your face. And we do this, you see this in some interpretations of how to approach like Santísima Muerte, of like holding plumeria, roses, gardenias, strong smelling things in front of your face as you talk over the bouquet so that your prayers and the roses are magnified together.
An amplifier, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And that similarly, the rosary itself is, there's not many offerings that are given to a saint in Catholic Orthodoxy, meaning it's going to be candles and flowers and prayer.
Mm,
It's not going to be food. It's not going to be bread. These are more sacramentals that are local in custom and are not sanctioned by the church outright. But flowers themselves as a way of beautifying and sanctifying a space where good scents attract good spirits and bad scents attract bad spirits. So to
yeah.
smell beautiful flowers like roses, lilies, strong, cloying smells is a smell of holiness outright.
Yeah.
Uh, and that we do get the lore of thorns and the blood that comes from thorns, and every rose has its thorn. You see that in a parallel to Saint Rita, who I mentioned earlier, with the crown of thorns. That like in the Southwest, you might get people when you offer thorns to offer saints flowers. Many times we'll take all the thorns off by hand. Saint
Mm,
Rita, one who is said to collect all those thorns to be used against your enemies, against people that are trying to hurt you or impede your holiness. So you
mm,
might use those. But then we also see in Iberian witchcraft from the beginning that thorns and brambles and anything, rose thorns, brambles, anything that has little stickers are used to in the mouth, like wet with your curse, and then push into people's door frames in
mm,
their ground so that should they step on them, they feel it. But these are elf shot. But these are
mm,
these are what witches use, like needles.
mm,
The thorns are pushed in this way. So the rose is the source of beauty and also the source of woe.
mm,
And I think as such is an incredibly strong, potent symbol of free will,
mm.
um, and of our ability to do things in life, again, before the silence of death, and our love for life, our lust for life.
Yeah.
And again, that kind of makes the red rose as the token of the Encrucijadas kingdom so potent in I think in that way.
Mm,
And I also think of the rose from The Little Prince, um, and her vanity, and that just incredible, just the token of someone's un unswayed love, but worry that the rose is alone and not thriving. And it's just I don't know the love of the Little Prince for the rose is outstanding, and the rose it doesn't deserve it. Um, it's yeah.
yeah. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. I saw a depiction of the Little Prince and his rose in looking at the depictions of the lovers. It does turn up in one of the modern decks. And the particular person that was writing about those tarot mysteries got very into that as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Big crossover. Yeah, yeah. That which rambles, right? As well. Oh,
Yeah, it's
beautiful.
that notion, I think, right, where the little prince is talking to the fox, and what is essential is invisible to the eye, the little prince repeated, so that he would be sure to remember. It is the time you have wasted for your rose that makes your rose so important.
Hmm.
It is a time that you
Okay.
wasted for my rose, said the little prince, so that he would be sure to remember. Men
Hmm.
have forgotten this truth, said the fox, but you must not forget it. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. You are responsible for your rose. Yeah. I am
Oh,
responsible for my rose, the little prince repeated so that he would be sure to remember. So, that which we have spent time with is part of our identity.
yeah, yeah,
Um, for better or worse, for thorn or scent. Um, there's something really beautiful there.
yeah.
Not that not that I'm not interested in what you have to say on the rose, but that what you have spent time on, or that you have spent time on your rose is what makes it sacred or important. Kind of speaks to conjunctio a little bit, right? Of
Hmm.
like things coming together um through contemporaneousness or by purpose or by will.
Yeah,
That conjunctio is a crossroads in itself amongst the figures
yeah.
and can be explosive with all of the craziness of the crossroads, of impact. And here's where we see a huge divergence, I think, between the 3/4 main systems of geomancy here, with like Ifa tends to take it one way. There's overlap, and European geomancy through like Agrippa and that school seems to take it in other, and
Yeah,
then the two main schools of like Muslim geomancy seem to take it in kind of others. There's overlap here because the figure is still a crossroad.
right.
It's still there's something here, but um it seems like Ifa tends to put it more towards the dualities and contradictions coming together and can represent an explosiveness that can happen. And I do see the things coming together as a common theme, but the explosiveness is not always what's talked about in the other systems.
No,
Uh, but it is one of the primary figures of the four permutations according to Ifa and Islamic geomancy of like you get arguably you can start anywhere, but the idea that you would start with Via and Populus
yeah.
as like one and two in that way, the lunar forces there, and that somehow in Muslim and many Muslim listings of the geometric figures, and certainly in Ifa, conjunctio is number three or number four, depending on where you're at, but often this third expression starting to combine the two, and that Karakar becomes the opposite of that and provides this first foundation for these kind of cardinal direction signals that is
Mm.
more prominent in Ifa, and specifically geomancy that's the more African schools than the more, let's say, Southeast Asian schools of geomancy.
Yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, they're the ones that you can turn upside down and they're still themselves.
Yeah.
For a start, yeah, there's that horizontal symmetry. It is its own opposite. Karka is both restriction and focus. Conjunctio is classically good with good and ill with ill. When it's turned on its head, it's still a matter of choice of cutting both ways. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Just in terms of the architecture of the forms of the figures. But yeah, as you say, a crossroads, a combination, and how that gets interpreted is it does have some qualities that speak very highly to its status generally as a figure of Mercury. So it talks about Mercury as the border crosser, as the code switcher, as the one that can speak between things, both in terms of eloquence and a certain amount of like used car salesman flim flam patter. You also see it referred to if it's the night side of Mercury and all of its like thieving forms. I think the phrase that gets used a lot is troublesome wit, and there's the idea that like the tongue is also what will land you in trouble.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because like just in reading quotes on publicly available awardy things of power of the mind, importance of education, and ethical dilemmas are
Mm-hmm.
are part and parcel of this sign, which is you're talking about that very strongly here.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about crossroads as like especially in contemporary culture as a place of yes, opening roads, but it's also a place of like difficult choices, and conjunctio is definitely The crossroad itself, the site of the crossing. It is not the traveler who crosses, which is more like via in my book. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, it's the X of the hourglass pinch, right? It's not just a place where choices can be made; it's a place where choices have to be made,
yeah.
which can
Well,
be
it's
a
interesting in the map of it. If you have Via as the traveler and Populus as this, I don't know, the undiscovered country the traveler is trotting,
Mhm.
um, or even a groups of travelers. But the idea that in conjunctio, there's obviously two forces at least coming together,
Yeah.
and these things ultimately, in order to move forward, need to be contained, which is why Carker makes sense as the next figure in that way of like they're if it's going to be productive, compromise has to be struck.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's still the two figures together kind of have a Mad Maxian like two men enter, one man leaves.
Well,
Yeah, and
also
one
very also very present. Sorry, also very present in the like the mysteries of contracts, right? All of
yeah,
those things, like the thing that lock the meeting that comes together, which is also sometimes conjunctio is called coming together or just together, and the contract that locks it down, and then where you go from there with via as they turn into each other. So the agreement that then dictates what happens next, the choice and the co-choice and the negotiation that follows from that, whether that's compromise or exploitation. Yeah, yeah, and again, conjunctio has as much good with good as ill with ill. That it's a foot in either world can be great, but you can't stay there. I think I've mentioned before, like the parts where it's definitely not good is in relation to illness. If you have one foot in the grave, right, is not a good place to be if you want to stick around in the place of the living. But it's also a place where you can conjure things that can go between them as well. Um, so we have, yeah, with the contract that can be that's potent that you then have to live with and work through. Um, the X,
but that notion of a contract being something you have to read and apply uh discretionary wisdom to, right? Like
mm-hmm.
I the you're talking about looking both ways before you cross the street, ultimately. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Before
yeah,
you're
yeah,
under the bonds of a Carcarian signature,
yeah.
um, that you have this opportunity here where you can change your direction, but this you have to notice that the opportunity is there, or you're not going to see it.
Right.
Which is interesting because again, I brought it up last time, but the idea that conjunctio is a wonderful sigil to invoke upon anything that is, and we see it in Pentacles of manifestation of
Yeah,
anything.
yeah.
Things coming together, intersection of the physical and non-physical, allowing for manifestation. Conjunctio seems to be a perfect thing, and that we do see Carker in some way reflected even in just the circle of containment itself.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that it doesn't always have to be in the same sigiled forms, but definitely the conjunctio appears on many pentacles, and it's not just for its planetary ascription, although that's its purpose is certainly an examination of certain planetary ascriptions it does carry.
Sure, but it's also a crosshairs. It's also the X that marks the spot.
Yeah.
It's also saying it needs to come here. I find it particularly helpful for distance workings, where I might get sent, like, used it a lot for helping people sell houses, where they'll send me like the four dirts from the four corners of the house, and it's a way of ensuring, like, here is where I want, people to come and offer you lots of money for your house, right? It will strengthen the link between the working and the work, between the effort and the outcome, between, yeah, the things that are set into the air and the things that happen on the ground. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
witches, the silly witches. Um, but it's interesting just that there's something in there about the crossroads of conjunctio and the epithets of Apollo and Hecate, right? Of Hecate being the one who works from afar, of Hekatos of
Mm,
Apollo, the one who shoots from afar. That
darting far, yeah, 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 for sure. And
and
present in all worlds, right? Like the
yeah,
across the three of them, or across the totality of them. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Can the crunchiest crunch and the creamiest creams, the heights and the depths. Yeah, absolutely. It's standing there as this, like, cosmic St. Andrew's cross. Yeah,
And there's
yeah.
also the in like in the alchemical way of the understanding that union is about to happen.
Mm,
The collision is happening of the superior and inferior triangles forming into the Mogan David, right? Forming into the Star of David.
mhm.
It is the natural extension of this impact that will form
Yeah.
between these things.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and it's the sight of that. Yeah, an X is also a kiss, right? Not only like physical proximity of paired lips, but like an exchange, which can be, you know, the Roman kind of honorific or a sort of salute, as can be intimacy, can be
an
respect, can be
exchange of Rona,
yeah, yeah, or exactly a contagion.
a, a
Yeah,
venereal disease, as well as a
uh-huh.
venereal delight.
Yeah, 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 and you can
A
kiss with
venereal
hands.
ease and a venereal disease. Um,
Yeah, as well as the osculum infamy, right?
yeah,
Infamum, the which again links back to the kinds of
a rosebud, if you will,
denizens at the crossroads. Yeah.
a rosebud of the or of
Puckering.
Citizen Kane.
Mhm.
Um,
So
so
yeah, speaks to you know, the things we do with lips, things we do with the hands, things we do with feet. Conjure, to swear together. Again, another form of pacting, of making a deal, as well as understanding, you know, to 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 quote Goody Chumley, right? The points of transmutability, right? Knowing and needling the tipping points of fate and fortune, right? Yeah.
so in that way, man, I don't feel like we like I know that I went through and suggested these topics, but I don't know if I thought about it that much. But lovers as a card
Mm.
certainly makes sense coming out of Conjunctio then, um,
Oh,
because
totally. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
lovers is such an interesting uh, arcanum trump, just because it both means what we want it to mean and not at all. Um, that there is just in the way that because it's where two become three. So we see the superior triangle, which would be on the ironically on on the inferior of the geomantic sign, but the upright triangle of man, woman, and angel, which some say is the angel of that you see in Temperance later. There's a lot of opinions about what exactly the Rider Waite deck is portraying. And of course, here's the thing: is you can see a lot of it because they talked about it.
Right.
But that the lovers in the Pictorial Key to the Tarot, so 1910, Waite's book just is described as attraction, love, beauty, trials overcome. And that reversed, it is failure, foolish designs. And another account speaks of marriage frustrated and contrarieties of all kinds.
Mm.
So you see then the marriage and the marriage frustrated, or the compromise and or the promise and the compromise then inverted, and something is off. So it is both what we want it to mean and what we don't want it to mean.
Yeah.
It's
It's
interesting.
Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden in this like Edenic state, but it's also got the trees already aflame,
Yeah,
as well as the fruit, as well as the apples and snakes. The seeds are already there for how this is not necessarily going to work out in the way you might want it to. Yeah, yeah. So purity and innocence before, as well as you know, a variety of innocences and paradises lost as well.
yeah.
I think Wake also does a thing where he's talking about spiritualized love before it's contaminated with material desire, and people
Or
sometimes
even
put
contaminated by material love, in the sense of like
yeah.
removing the priest or the vicar that's in the traditional card image and replacing it with an angel. So there's two humans in there, and the card is originally twins in many decks, reflecting Gemini, and is not necessarily lovers, but is two that are one already. And we see that in Adam and Eve is much better than any. I think the symbolism of like how can we show Adam and Eve is important, because you're talking about two that one came out of the other. They are meant to be two halves of one celestial atom body,
Yeah.
right? And that's interesting too. That it's the that Eve, we inherently see the serpent and the apple tree uh, there as part of like not just the it's of course her specific iconography, but it also brings into evidence like that's her iconography, which is the temptation and the fall right
Right.
there, unescapably so.
Yeah.
And if the card is associated with like failure and foolish designs, well, Eve on her own and Adam on his own with the flaming tree is where there's something there. And that the angel, although he's not carrying the flaming sword, there's this blessing of union, and on other decks it is the Cupid, the Eros, the Puto.
At least one Cupid. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
shooting.
often nailing, and often more pointing at the woman or women in the card, or but occasionally at the dude as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You also get Adam looking at Eve and Eve looking at the angel as
Yeah,
well. And then you get, yeah, like Paul Foster Case saying that not only identifying the angel as Raphael, but saying that the blessings are being poured equally onto both sides of a male and female polarity.
yes,
Yeah, it's interesting looking at the earlier forms. Some of the earliest, it's just called amore. It's love itself.
yeah,
And again, the links back to, yes, this was part of a series, but it were also marking, in some cases, some very particular things. One of the earliest we found is canonically about a very particular wedding as well. There's the Visconti deck of 1441, which is specifically depicting the marriage of Bianca Maria, the daughter of the Duke of Milan, to Francesco Sforza. So the Visconti Sforza deck, right? And we know this because it's literally showing the family's heraldry on the little the little wedding arch tent thing. So it's very canonically that, and like you said, yeah, there's a human person presiding over that wedding. But to start with love rather than lovers is really fascinating, and how it becomes the lover first as well from there. That it's again typically two people, although there's some that do actually highlight that it's more amorous, right? The so-called Charles VI deck, which is sometimes said to be Florentine in origin, comes around the 1460s. Actually shows three promenading couples, one of them getting real frisky. And then you get the like Tarot de Paris as well, which shows one particular couple who are getting pretty handsy, and Cupid kind of firing his arrows at them. And it's not until like the Marseille deck that the courting couple's replaced by a young man standing between two women who pull him in opposite directions. And here's where it's still the lover, or actually no, I think it's still called love. I might be wrong about, no, it might be the lovers by that point. But the idea being that it's not a single union; it's a choice, and it's actually Rachel Pollack, it seems, who really popularizes this notion that it's about being torn between, yes, potentially wife or mistress, but also this existential choice of safe domesticity or dangerous excitement. And if do we, what is it to follow the heart, to abandon family and take a risky option, or do something responsible but potentially boring? It seems Pollock who kind of popularizes that take on what that's about. Yeah, the comfort zone or the risk of the unknown. So a wider crossroads choice, right? And then the Golden Dawn come along and they're like, nope, it's Perseus and Andromeda and a sea monster. And that's where like the Zane correspondence to, yes, Gemini, but also the sword. The Golden Dawn often say that Andromeda is chained to the rock of materialism. So again, there's this like interplay of spiritual and material going on. And that's where it seems where the name shift in English at least goes from the lover to the lovers. Yeah.
mm,
And then modern decks that don't do any of the previous things, and there's a couple different traditions there, right? Of depicting an actual couple, an actual marriage, an actual choice to be together, which is not necessarily the same thing, or a choice between two options, or like that existential choice. If they're not doing any of those things, then they tend towards emphasizing erotic love in various ways. But then, yeah, you also get. I need to look that up again. There was at least one that was the Little Prince with his rose, and like what you love is what informs you. You are what you love. You're also responsible for the thing that you've poured time into and cultivated, and it needs your watering.
mm.
Mm.
You also get the Hercules at the crossroads
Oh
marriage,
yeah.
vice and virtue, which of course
Mm.
is the difference right there between like which type of love are we talking about.
Yeah.
And I've certainly seen readers use averse and reverse as indications of which type of love is being discussed.
Mm.
But it's quite an interesting it's a card that, like death, people react to without even hearing the interpretation by the reader,
Hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because it's just so quintessentially, and it's like this is Adam and Eve. This isn't, you and your lover necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But it could also be you. So why not? It's also one of the cards that gets the most redrawn according to the prerogative of the card designer, and that many card decks will incorporate um, various forms of homosexual and heteronormative and bisexual or poly love, depending on what it is meant to be
Right.
in the symbolism of that specific deck.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's always interesting to see how that goes, kind of like in Lenormand decks. Like, are you including an extra lady card so you can have two ladies, or do you follow the traditional thing of like using the substitutes that have been developed,
Hmm.
which I kind of like the substitutes that have been developed over the years for like the secret gay coding of any deck by readers that have passed those, what worked for them.
Hmm.
That's a whole other discussion that you can have with Lenormand, specifically Lenormand. But is there a way to indicate how might you be shown in tarot that there is what is being talked about as a homosexual love affair through the use of the Lover's card? And if you follow from a Lenormand, there would be somebody riding a horse somewhere around
Hmm.
uh, this card, just as the rider is the kind of marker of gay love in the Lenormand deck,
Hmm.
and the bear tends to be the marker of lesbian love in the Lenormand deck by
Hmm.
tradition, which is stereotypical understandings but some things being written in one, and the other one is a large, uh, 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 a berry beast. I don't know how to describe it, but that is
better,
how
better the bear in the forest than the man.
yeah, um, yeah, exactly. Oh, there's a whole layer of symbolism there. I got it. Yeah. So okay, and lovers with the Hercules thing too with vice and virtue is interesting, just in consideration of conjunctio specifically, and the need to examine, like, is the situation what you think it is? Is this really where it needs to go?
Right. Right.
And
Are the head and feet passive, or is it outreaching? Right? Is it focused, or is it perceiving, or an increase of awareness?
well, I think that if you want to follow the kind of Gurdjieffian ideal, that being passive to the active is still passive, but it's passive with a purpose. It's not passive to listlessness, and that's not what passivity is.
Right.
But if your arms are open, you are passive.
Mm.
You can't attack with your arms open the same way.
Right.
But you can be receptive in that way, and that's where those other qualities of context come in, and the arguments from people like Rachel Pollack and in their early writings and things like that, to understand feminine does not mean female. Passive is not automatically synonymous, that we don't have to reinforce the black white Indo-European great grand schema of like male female up down,
Mm.
but there is this language of the tarot is coming through a largely Mediterranean Indo-European school of thought, and so it's going to have those notions of feminine passivity and male aggressiveness. But who is the horse and who is the rider question it has to come into play here.
Mm.
So the woman outstretched upon the altar of the third right, of the third degree, or the great right, that is conjunctio. Sure, it's the hieros gamos ready for things, but that's still about to receive the phallus of the high priest, or if depending on which, are you Gardnerian Alexandrian persuasion there, of who's holding the chalice, who's holding the dagger. uh,
Mm.
but yeah.
But also, it's what's done afterwards as well. Like conjunctio can sometimes indicate a lasting thing, but not more typically. Just as Karka, yes, can indicate the wedding ring, but it's more likely a marriage of convenience. It doesn't, especially Karka, doesn't necessarily speak to a burning and passionate love. Conjunctio is way more often in specifically readings on love. Ships in the night. Hookup culture. He said, sounding like 800 years old, complaining about kids and their
Yeah.
sex lives. But like it's knocking boots, and then not, far more
Well, it makes
often.
sense. It makes sense, precisely because the hands are open.
Yeah.
The head and feet are in an open state here, or that with if it evolves into Carker that there's a seizing of an opportunity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're preserving what was there
No,
permanently.
no, it's a
Um,
centrifugal force, and that's
you've
going to fly
changed
off.
the form.
Yeah.
The heart and the desire are now gone, or the throat and the desire are both gone, depending on which interpretation of those dots you're going for.
Right.
But nope, okay, hands and feet or hands and head. But I mean, if you're laying down with your hands outstretched, it's definitely conjunctio. It reflects that kind of human as the crossroads thing going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
very interesting. Or even the idea of using Carker as the shape of the Vesca Pisces as the layman, right? Of like this
Hmm.
is what you're giving birth to as a magical act. But at the same time, even the very box around anything, the border around a tarot card is very Carker, just because it's containing something.
Yeah.
The kind of the allowance of a mystery where the point of a mystery is that, or like as it was described to me very Masonically, of like secrets can be revealed, mysteries constantly reveal. Uh,
I like that.
be shared in that way, but mysteries are a permanent question. It's a guiding question. It is
Yeah.
to that. And that in mystery school is not that you're being taught secrets. Secrets may be a part of it, but that you're starting to look at the world in through a lens of mystery. And so that if Carker is the containment, doesn't tell you what to feel.
Yeah.
Carker shows you an image, and that if you're trained to look at it, that the Vesca Pisces allows you to see more deeply into something.
Yeah.
And that allows for a conjunctio, a conjunction of what you've been trained and now what you can intuit.
Right. The opening door. Yeah. If Karka's the lock and the separation enforced in boundaries, conjunctio is a key, or I guess even more so is the moment and momentum of the union of the turning key and the shifting lock.
Yeah. Whereby Carker is expanded to include the door frame itself.
Yeah.
And you walk through it as opposed to just, oh, I know what that symbolizes.
Right. Right.
Um,
And is
yeah.
also the door is now ajar. So the question becomes what can come in as well and what's being
Yeah.
let out. Yeah.
On that notion of like what thinking that you know what something is as like, well, I've answered this. It reminds me very much of one of the things that I think a lot about with Maria Sabina.
Mm.
And not just as like a this it actually is like the key for me for with Maria Sabina is that we'll go into our specifics. We should go into our specifics. But that when Wasson comes and approaches this Mazatec curandera who is used to using the little children in a specific way, so psilocybin mushrooms, psilocybina mexicana, and he lies to her and says that he has an ailment because she won't just treat anybody because they're curious.
Yeah.
Curiosity is a Western thing, this way that he's framing it. And I can't help but think in all of my examinations of and admirations of her and the kind of pop culture deity that she has become, which she might abhor,
Yeah.
honestly,
Right.
would probably abhor. Because when you come to her very what is it? From the moment the foreigners arrived to search for God, the saint children lost their purity, they lost their force, the foreigners spoiled them. From now
Mm.
on, there won't be any good. There's no remedy for it. Maria Sabina. So,
Oof.
like the notion that when Watson came, that he said he wanted to see God, to which her answer was go to a church. Um, and this idea that he failed to understand that what she was trying to do with the mushrooms was to cure things. And I would propose that if he had come and just decided to talk, he lied about his physical symptoms in order to get a session, in order to get a velada, and she saw through it. But it's still it started the wheel in motion, and he was like, my world's expanding. But if he had said that I feel disconnected from my fellow man, I do not see a connection between everything in the universe. I am
Mm.
uncomfortable. I am losing sleep because I'm thinking about things too much. Those are all physical symptoms
Right.
of what he was possibly going through. But he
Right.
didn't describe that. He faked it. So rather than engage in an honest way from the beginning, which could have been a different engagement, and which I
Mm.
would propose is like with mushrooms especially, which seems to have their own agenda, and to teach you something with being called the little children, the little teachers, or like, the Tenanakat in Nahuatl, the flesh of the gods, the name that's thrown around a lot for Mexico.
Mm.
Um, but the communion wafer, all these symbolisms that are there, if he had just fucking done the work and described what he was going through, it
Yeah.
could have been an honest interaction. And so that's that. I guess that's why I'm pairing it up to like the mistaken flash that can happen when we think the Vesica Pisces is, the container in the limits of our knowledge and our instant recognition rather than the keyhole through which we have to walk through. Uh,
Yeah.
we mistake the birth act or the fall of Lucifer as the end point. What
Yeah.
happens when it hits the ground?
Right.
What is going through the vagitus is the point of birth, is then to have life, It is not to focus on the passageway itself. You cannot be in a liminal state at all times.
Right. The old the psychonautic adage of like once you have received the message, put the phone down.
Yeah,
Yeah, don't just keep doing like entheogens of any sort. Yeah, for the sake of doing them, right?
yeah.
If you were doing them for any purpose beyond, feeling funny or recreation or what have you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, let's dig in. This is Maria Sabina Magdalena Garcia. Was born 22nd of July, circa 1894. It said she didn't quite know, which is not uncommon. Even my own great grandmother wasn't quite sure of the year she was born. Not uncommon in the Sierra Mazateca, right? Um, how do you say the name of the village?
Oh, the as far as where she was from, Sierra
Yeah,
Mazateca, the Joutla de Jimenez. Yeah.
Puebla. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So she's her parents are both like farmers, as far as you see, like campesinos.
Yeah.
Dad dies when she's quite young, like 3 or something, and it's said that her grandfather and her great grandfather on her father's side were spiritual healers of one sort or another. But after the death, they move into town and she grows up in the house of her maternal grandparents. And what we get to really, along with her deep interaction with these Mazatec traditions of working these medicines with these mushrooms that what we call magical later, is described as what was the quote I found? A story of extraction, cultural appropriation, bioprospecting, and colonization. Um, that in short, her interactions or the interactions of North America and the Western Anglosphere, whether that was like burgeoning ethnomycology or a bunch of people seeking God in a substance or God from a substance, interacting with her and her her village and things, produce some so like in parts a story that's both like tragic and kind of angering in various ways. It's even kind of present, like in that it's also claimed at certain points that that she only spoke Mazatec, and so many of her supposed quotes in English are not necessarily verified. Which is always worth pointing out that later, like a bunch of folks that did speak that language, wrote up a bunch of her poems, her calls, her prayers, right?
Yeah.
And it's important that she's also regarded as a poet. Yeah, I can get to that later because that's a nice point too. I think that's a nice point to talk about after we go through the anthropologists and supposed ethnomycologists, like you just mentioned, Gordon Wasson specifically, right?
Yeah.
And his wife Valentina. So it's claimed at certain points that she's called the curandera a lot, right? I've also seen it claimed that she said that she was in fact a sabia, and that
Oh, yeah, yeah.
sabia and curandera are not the same thing, and that before becoming a sabia, that she had tried curanderismo, but wasn't into it.
Yeah, that's the comment. That's definitely the Wikipedia line. I like
Yeah,
curanderismo is such a broad category that if she doesn't identify as one, that's fine. In the larger
yeah,
practices of Mexico, it's going to be classified under that kind of way. Sometimes curanderismo is specifically defined as it has to have a Christian overlay. And then other times it's just like any act of healing. Anybody who claims to be healing people is participating in curanderismo, which means the way of the healers.
gotcha.
The way so like the sabias are like to be a sabia is a different thing as one who knows something. Um,
Mm,
and these are local expressions of what that is. But again, the accuracy of what these things are in the early relations are very different than later on. Like I think the Maria Sabina, the Her Life and Chance, was how I kind of that was by Estrada, was the first kind of book that I dove into long ago about her. But definitely curanderismo is not a unified practice, and curanderismo does have an attitude in some areas of being a battle against dark forces, and that you're engaging in that battle. through like, and so that Christian parallel can be so strong there.
Mhm.
But as far as a person who knows things, there are some people that would say that like one of the branches or one of the callings within curanderismo, besides a hierbera or partera or huesador or any of these different, an herbalist, a masseuse, could be sabia, could be someone of this type of who works with visionary plants. And many people would call her a shaman. Of course, this term is inaccurate too. But ultimately, it's there's practices that are documented, and her poetry is heavily documented, especially her by Estrada, her workings with her niece Maria Aurora. And
Mm.
it's common that many people are going to have the word their name Maria, right? So her sister is Maria Ana, she's Maria Sabina, her niece is Maria Aurora. And so you get these beautiful long epithets that are done as part of the veladas. Um, uh,
Yeah.
just
Can you talk a little more about Velada?
Yeah, veladas are. I mean, veladas are an interesting one because there's a lot of different forms of what velada is. It's obviously coming from a to velar to keep watch by candlelight
Mm.
within many Hispanic cultures. In this specific context, and in this way, it's very much defined by the Life magazine article that Wasson wrote, um, because of this mention of a velada by a shaman in 1955, and he claims to be among the first modern Western men to follow the traditional velada ritual on psilocybin.
Yeah.
And
That
so,
Life magazine article comes out in, I think, 1957, and he's
yeah,
talking about an encounter he has with Maria Sabina, with his wife in 55, I believe. Although he also claims to have talked to her before that in like 53.
yeah, and he supposedly is keeping her identity a secret, but people find her, right? And so she, John Lennon, Mick Jagger, Bob Dylan all go there to kind of tap into the growing counterculture and tapping into psychedelics as part of the kind of hippie identity. But as far as what a velada is, it can vary, and the descriptions are in the relations of her books. But it's involving ingestion of massive amounts of mushrooms, not just like small amounts, but like 12, 24 pairs. It's taken in pairs. And that she's taking it, the patient will take a few, but that it's her job to go into this, and they're taking it. So through this, we're both in similar states, and the mushrooms can talk to us, that I can start seeing what your issue is and how to help you.
Right.
So it is parallel to a shamanic quest of like there's going to go into a visionary state and move things, but it is specifically a form of purgative medicine to remove problems from someone's life, and that the psilocybin purgative act, the vomiting that can come with it, is like when you do ayahuasca, is considered to be part of it. It
Purging, yeah.
happens for people, and that now a lot of the veladas are done with um, Savia Divinorum. And things have gone through many as permutations, and the Mazatecs have their own rituals that the different indigenous communities are going to have different versions of what a velada is, and a velada could involve substances or it might not. But ultimately, it's a long session where the things are invoked, conjured, that the prayer is constantly being used, and that the person may be asleep, they may be unconscious, there might be normal things going on, various barridas, the sweepings might happen, various limpias might happen, a lot of copal and incense burning and this type of thing, all to help the curandera, the sabia, the person in charge to enter into a visionary state. And the poetry that comes with this, at least what's documented with Maria Sabina, is beautiful, right? Like the path of the tracks of the hands, the path of the tracks of the heels, the path of the tracks of the hands, the path of the tracks of the feet, to which like there's this whole litany at one point, like Maria Aurora goes into, like, if anybody wants to hex us, if anybody wants to tell lies, it will become garbage, it will become dust, it will become the whirlwind, it will become wind. It's certain,
Mm.
it's true, it's not a matter of evil, it's not a matter of doing harm, it's only a matter of well-being and life, with sap, with dew. Then Sabina takes over. I am a sap woman, a dew woman, I am a fresh woman, a woman of clarity, I'm a woman of light, a woman of the day, a woman who looks in the insides of things, I am a woman who investigates. Holy Father, I am Saint Peter woman, I am Saint Paul woman, I am a saint woman, I am a spirit woman, woman of good words, of good words, of good breath and good saliva. It's certain, it's true. That is your clock. That is your communion wafer. That is your number. One and only Father, Father of sap, Father of the dew, Father of freshness, Father of clarity, Holy Father. I am the child of Mary. I am the child of Saint Joseph. I am a child of the Candelaria. It is certain, it is true.
Mm. Yeah.
Sorry, I had to cough a little bit. But
Whew. Yeah. Amazing
there's these
stuff.
litanies that are not unlike Carmina Gadelica type of thing,
Mm.
right? There's these folk litanies that are coming out. There's certain phrases, in my experience, she's not making these up whole cloth, um, and she's obviously relying on. This is why curanderos would say there's obvious Christian symbolism coming in here, whether it's interpreted through an indigenous lens or official doctrine lens is not really up for debate. We know there's she's interpreting through whatever lens she's interpreting it through.
Yeah.
And this is the wonderful like umbrella of Catholicism that I like to talk about all the time. But there's phrases in here that are inherited cultural groupings that carry weight to this is no different than the goetic, like here's my litany of and legacy of power, like where do I get my authority from,
Yeah.
ultimately saying that you are Cyprian or you're Solomon or you're descended from Adam, and therefore you have Daddy God as your, in your blood, and that you are unmistakably a child of the first creation, and
Right.
that you can have authority over spirits. And here she's doing the same thing of like, I am a person of pure intent. I'm coming here. I am breath. I am dew. I like Saint Peter and Saint Paul. They are the ones who have powerful eyes. Powerful is their will. Powerful is their faces. Powerful is their day. That there's these things that come in. What's that one? St. Peter, St. Paul, as he appeared in the night in the darkness above the great expanse of the waters, above the expanse of the divine sea, he came forth, Lord, he came forth sacred. St. Peter, he is the one with powerful eyes, powerful is his will, powerful is his face, powerful his day. He is the one who will shine, he is the one who thunders, he is the one who sends forth St. Peter, St. Paul.
Mm.
So they're calling out to things. This is a session recorded in 1956, in July. Um, so there's like, and she starts mentioning this as, for instance, it's interpreted as St. Peter and St. Paul, but she uses the word ustandi and arustandi beneath the water, arustandi beneath the sea, to which he says it is a name she gives to St. Peter and St. Paul. Which is kind of one of those things of like, he didn't really go into the detailed things. He wasn't, it was recorded, but it feels like it was more of a exotification and allowance to make it seem more interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of the inner meaning of those things. Later, we do get interpretations and translations that are probably a lot more accurate. But the poetry remains there in that way of how, in her words, and we have recordings of her too. You can listen to her
Yeah.
singing these rezas to the air itself, right? To consecrate the little children that she's if following anything like Monovelas, of touching them as she's saying it, going up in these things, putting pairs down, determining how many pairs she's going to take, how many pairs she's going to give to her assistant, who is functioning like a sitter as well, even though they have to take something.
Yeah.
How are they giving to the patient, and all of these things. And it's truly, it is the her role as the sabia um to truly uh, take the largest dose, also because she's probably more used to it,
Right.
uh, and going through that way, but that it is her job to figure out how to heal, how to help the person.
Yeah.
And yeah, mushroom medicine is a big thing. And if you're using these prayers, where if it's anything like Santo Daime, Jurema, or these other Brazilian cults I'm familiar with, this repetition helps keep you grounded, and then like you might hear certain phrases come out of your mouth out of order, which is a form of divination.
Mm.
That you can rely on these litanies as a way to enter into a hypnagogic state, and that it also provides a grounding, much like if I think many of our listeners might have supposedly done ayahuasca. The traditional songs and chants and setting of ayahuasca is important. That
Mm.
is, like many people will say that these aren't truly hallucinogens, that they're more of hypnagogues, that the state that you enter into communion with them in as they're in your body heavily determines the power of suggestion heavily determines the visions you will get,
Yeah.
which is true of anything through the sensorium like LSD, which you're going to see, I've heard, is determined by like a hyper interpretation of the visual field and things like this. But in this case, the darkened room, the same thing we're talking about with sleep deprivation, is that the purgative effect, the discomfort of the body, the relationship to discomfort, the relationship to shame in front of a group with your discomfort, the
Mm.
lack of familiarity with the language being said, the money you've invested in this special, eco mycological trip or shamanic trip you're going on, that you to tourist um, in that way. And
Yeah.
there's all these things that can play into each one of those is a factor.
Hmm.
Just as before, that sleep deprivation can set us up for new interpretations of the coat on the wall. That I, that the children here, the little teachers, are another way for us to enter into that state and combine with things like fasting and intent and training and making sure that you have the container
Yeah.
for these experiences that you can understand. And certainly I understand the sense of betrayal that Maria Sabina talks about by Watson's use and exploration of these things, even though she supposedly continues to talk to him, and continues to meet foreign people and famous foreign people. But
Yeah.
she dies in poverty of malnutrition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, come on, really?
Yeah. Yeah. So the context is like the 57 article seeking the magic mushroom is like is Vasson saying that he is like the first proper Western scientist who has discovered these things. So there's already this sense of like, what discovered from whom? Like,
Yeah.
it's worth pointing out like there's no proof acknowledged by Western authorities of these like sacred mushroom healing rites or divination ceremonies or rituals. And that he's like, no, I've proved it. I've proved it. And then then writes a book where he gives her, her identity and her location, despite claims that he wasn't going to do that. And yeah, like you said, as early as like 1962, you've got all sorts of Westerners, famous or otherwise, seeking her out in her like remote village, which was without electricity until after she died in 85. And this is where it starts to cause a bunch of actual problems. It's not just you didn't cite me properly. It's like you've upended my whole life. The police investigate as a drug dealer, right? The wider community really hate this trip tourism and blame her for it. Like her house gets burned down, like her son gets murdered. She's like jailed at various points.
Yep.
Like it doesn't, it doesn't go well for her. Yeah,
What I think is interesting too is like it's not just the on the cultural note of yes, his discovery of psilocybin mushrooms in this way, but there was already the interpretation that in pre-Columbian Mexico that there was this, Tetenlacat, Tetenlacat, the flesh of the gods, is being used,
mm,
and we have evidence in steles, in codices, in this way. But until Wasson met Maria Sabina in the 50s, there was almost no proof that mushrooms were being contemporaneously used.
right.
So whether or not her traditions went back to pre-Columbian times, we will never know. We would assume that they do,
Yeah,
in some form. But this was the first proof that this was a modern thing, and
yeah,
that it wasn't that the interpretation of what was mushroom on these stela and in these codices was accurate, because some people said the Indians are making this up, which
right,
is bizarre because hallucinogenic things do exist around the world.
right.
Um, but yeah, and it didn't go well. It didn't go well. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And also, like, yeah, one of the quotes attributed to her also says that like it starts to. Well, there's the wider economic factors, right? There are now compounds derived from psilocybe mushrooms that are patented and making billions of dollars for pharmaceutical companies, and those indigenous communities don't seem to be getting any of that. There's also like how it changes the expectations and the reputations, if you want to put it like that, of the little teachers themselves. I found a quote. She says that before Wasson, no one took the children simply to find God. They were always taken to cure the sick,
yeah,
which speaks to the point you were making about like if you frame this as like I want to see God as opposed to I feel disconnected from the world and the animating force of life that binds all things, then it's going to start shifting things. Yeah, I guess this kind of raises to me questions about how that bid for authenticity from the part of people here at reading this Life magazine article and going to try and seek out the medicine woman is partly what makes her life so difficult. Like the idea of I don't know, I don't think I'm getting off track here. That like when spiritual tourists sought and let's be real, still seek to find out what's going on in other cultures, to do the medicine properly, there's already a complex interaction of capital and authority going on, right? Whether that's the first wave of people going to someone and trying and talking about it back home, or the next wave trying to go and bring it back, or even trying to seek like a certificate or some kind of qualification in it, which again is I guess a kind of respectful. It's not just going in and grabbing them like Vasson did to go and cultivate them in France and the wider in wider Europe for Abby Hoffman to synthesize the compounds of them. But like also like I don't know, am I assuming being a medicine person requires living in that culture for a decade? Like what are they initiating to, I guess is the question. Like which of these is not just traditional medicine ceremonies but the means of transmitting training? And I don't know, I just wonder like about the wider issues for transmission of spirit work, right? Like are you being more traditional and respectful by like inserting yourself into something and expecting it to be something that you can then carry on? Are we, are you acknowledging the, like you said, the agency of the mushrooms themselves? Like how, yeah, I don't know. Just thinking about
all of
like,
those things are like those you're talking about ethics and morality that are being discussed all the time, right? Even within spiritual traditions that have nothing to do with psychedelics. This
absolutely, yeah. That's yeah,
appropriation and how it goes. I think the active cycle, because it's very easy to call people out on misappropriation. You can misappropriate from within your own culture.
right.
That's the shit of it. I think in this case is how do we have evidence that this was misappropriation? That she fucking died in poverty. That
Yeah,
the source of this, that her community turned on her. There could have been a way that this could have been integrated, and that wealth of even wealth in general could have been shared with the people that gave this information.
yeah,
And part of that is the anthropological model until recently of like, well, I discovered this, and of course I'm not actually affecting these people by reporting on them. Lies.
yeah.
This is Heisenberg 101.
No,
So
no, yeah, no one dictates the shape of the story and its reception more than the documentary maker, right? Who
yeah,
may be claiming or hiding behind this thing of like, I'm just reporting,
yeah.
I'm just showing, but you're editing, you're getting to make the decisions about what gets shown and what doesn't and how.
So what is the engagement with the community? Because if the community has said we don't want this,
Yeah,
and he doesn't listen, okay, is there what's the middle? What is there middle ground? Is there something? How can you what are the reparations for this?
right,
I don't know, listening to the people whose medicine it is, but I understand that that's not how the Western capitalist world works. That's not how, in the globalization of traditions, which is something that the West works towards, that this Protestantism of universality,
mm,
the drive that because it works for one person, it can work for all, and because one person has access, that it must be shared to all. This is not part and parcel of, even though there's great flow and a different understanding of how these things work within indigenous societies. And it's, I don't want to speak about the fabled indigistan
right,
universality, but like just a difference in that, pluralities is there. Like it's not a universe, it's a pluriverse, and I'm fine. And I think that that's an important conception. But the idea that divorcing yourself from the very communities and acting like you have no impact upon them through your reporting is already, he can't come back from that.
right,
And those of us that practice traditions that are not from the cultures that we're from, we have a duty to continue engaging with those cultures.
mm,
We have a duty to make sure that we are exposing ourselves, conversing with, that we're not isolating it fully from the source. And the thing is that anything will change in each generation.
right.
Everything evolves. So like there's not this static tradition that is always intact the way it is, unless you have no contact with anybody, as the same family's doing it.
Right,
But
right. It's not to be frozen in amber. The quote you love about like tradition not being the ashes, right?
yeah, not smothered by the ashes, but to light new fires, or whatever
Yeah,
faith that is. And
yeah.
that it's similarly Chesterton's thing of democracy of the dead, right? Uh,
Hmm.
that tradition is something there. But I get again that you also, you can't feed this solely on the appetite of the people who demand it. It has to be fed by the people who are cooking as well. That's a really long metaphor.
Let her
What I'm
cook.
saying
Yeah,
is the culture that is producing this needs to be taken into context.
right. The stewardship here.
Yeah, and that's not about preserving and savoring. It is about understanding that things exist in relation.
Right.
And if you ignore those relationalities, that's when we get into danger. If you're giving back to your community, if you're engaging with your community, if it's, within various ADR, ATRs, people coming to it from outside the traditions, like how are you engaging with the communities where these traditions are from? Like, are you aware of larger community patterns that you're helping? Are you sending relief and aid that's the best of your ability to elders within the tradition when they need it? Like, how are you, what's the engagement there?
Right.
And that's a larger conversation that any of us should be having
Yeah.
constantly with ourselves and with our communities, with our contemporaries, with our elders, with our godchildren, anything along the way with our God family. That is important. They know, these what is the duty? That's only something you can answer and ask for yourself. But being in the Orisha tradition, the concept of good character is going to enter in. And what is good character? It's not just about how I handle situations, but it's how also can be how I help others handle situations, or what I model or what I represent from the lineage that I do come from.
Yeah.
Uh, that we do represent our elders to a certain extent. It's not just what I want to do with everything, but if you act a certain way and the elders tell you don't act that way, then that's part of it too.
Yeah.
And it's not that can be, of course, usurped for heavy control mechanisms and control of wealth and resources and hoarding in that way. But it also can be a really beneficial thing when you can get away from that scarcity mindset and actually develop a system of support and mutual aid, whereby the community doesn't forget its own. And that if you're in the community, you're in the community. And there are people that are going to want, it's the same thing that I come down to all the time. The communities are things that not that you join, but that you co-create. And the minute you're a part of acknowledge that you're part of a community, there's a debt already there.
Yeah.
And how you choose to repay that debt is on you to figure out through the models and exemplars that are already existing and through your own ingenuity. But
Yeah.
there is a debt. Communities are not there for you to still just get resources from or learn how they do things and move on.
Right.
That's my abhorrence of new natives and the idea that, oh, I found this new trick, this other thing that no one knows about. I'm going to add that to my eclectic path. Well, good for you. But like here's another group that like that's the real devaluing is again, reading something from a book is a one-sided conversation with someone that you cannot actually ask questions clarifying where you are misinterpreting things even that the author wrote, let alone things that the author misinterpreted.
Right, 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 right. You're doing yourself a disservice if nothing else. I mean, that's a bit of a selfish lens to put it in, but like, yeah,
But
if
it's
you're,
it's it's theft of mind either way, right? Like that's
yeah,
what it comes down to is that you, by not citing your sources, by not understanding the living relationship, that knowledge actually is a relationship with something, not something to be traded and owned. It's not
yeah,
something you possess. It is something that you exist in relationship with. And
yeah,
therefore it puts in the context of teachers and students and transmission and
yeah,
cultural relativity, cultural significance, cultural context, and all these other things that are happening. So I think there's a lot there, and I think Maria Sabina raises a lot of that.
yeah.
And there's a lot for any of us to think about if you're gonna. Oh, no, I was gonna go into right into bad metaphors about roses and thorns, but I'll stay out of that. Um,
It was
I'll, I will not suffer myself to deal with my own metaphors right now. But
there was a little ray of hope in reading that Homero Aritis, Mexican poet,
mhm,
who not only described Maria Sabina as the greatest visionary poet in 20th century Latin America and wrote a novel called Gane de Dios
yeah,
about her life and about the things she went through. He did actually like bring her to Mexico City for medical treatment towards the end of her life. Like
yeah,
there was an effort not just to tell her story for her, but to like pay something back and kind of look after her a little bit at least.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Maria. Highly encourage listening to her to the songs and to she died in 85. Like this is not that long ago. But
Right.
because of the when I specifically have mentioned the great strangeness of the 90s and specifically Llewellyn published witchcraft books coming into Mexican parlance and it changes and then like Mexico City starts adopting all these weird mixes of New Age interpretations of Wicca and conjure and follow and hoodoo and all these other things that are going in, and it becomes very strange to tell what is real. It becomes this thing of like if they see something, they're going to incorporate it into it. And Mexico gets this real reputation for sancochiness, like sancocho being the Puerto Rican term, like a stew that has everything,
Yeah.
of just being like, what the fuck is going on? And it also diluted a lot of actual native traditions and traditions that had developed. Of course, this is the same kind of argument we've had in discussion, like in a good argument sense of like, if a goetic magician calls upon an Eshu of Kimbanda, is he a Kimbandero? Well, during the moment when he's talking to Eshu, he's kind of a Kimbandero, but he's still, if his primary lens is through Goetia, he's still a goetic magician primarily. That's the
Right.
thing he's filling in the information he doesn't know with.
He's
Is
kimbanding, right? Like if we're going
he's
to verb it.
exactly, he's participating in the verb, but that doesn't mean that's his identity. If someone who is
And it also doesn't mean he has the toolkit to be able to do that, like or the
yeah,
best toolkit for it, or the most effective, or the most
yeah,
sustainable. Right.
yeah. And it becomes too like this thing when you encounter like the trump card that gets tossed about, and I've seen talked about negatively in chat rooms, or Discord servers, and things like this, of people bemoaning that just because possession exists doesn't mean you're getting possessed by the actual thing you're saying you're possessed by. Very true. But it's different of this thing of like when groups in Brazil are claiming to be possessed by certain demons. And like they can add in like, oh, Bale's good for this, and this, and incorporates these plants that only grow in Brazil in this region, and this it incorporates, oh, and you can do these ebos from this candomblé booklet over here with this demon, and people go like, how do you know? Like, because he came down and said this.
Right.
And then you think, okay, well, shit. How come I don't get it? Is it jealousy that you don't have that ability? Is it that we don't think loosely about that? Is it the fact that through the age of the internet, there's so much information that personal gnosis gets constantly presented as universal gnosis, and that universal gnosis seems to make us feel inadequate about our personal gnosis, and that we have to suddenly be like, my version of my bail is bigger than your bail,
Right.
however it goes, and then I still want to hear exuma and that Baal will cause your downfall. And this is Baal first and foremost of like Baal is the thing that will be your downfall. And I'll always take the exuma lens on that one. But that I don't know, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Um so I do think, with Maria Sabina, by the time I had talked with many people, Bryant Holman back in the day, and the some of the curanderos and curanderas that he was talking to on the borderlands. He was more in the Chihuahua area, going through Falfurrias, Texas, where he was based.
Mm.
He headed the One Yahoo group on One Curanderismo group on Yahoo for many years before he passed, and was one of the first people to translate a lot of Santísima Muerte and Saint Cyprian things into English from the cards that he had seen. So in the early 2000s, you saw descriptions. In the 90s, you saw descriptions of Saint Cyprian things that those were his translations,
Mm.
and some of the early descriptions of what you were seeing in pamphlets. And then Santísima Muerte by 2003, 2004, after the Tepito revelation of 2001, where she becomes this public figure on a
Mm.
much wider scale. Um, he translated those things and were quickly adopted by many people, and kind of pamphlets published and little booklets published by publishers that are really just plagiarizing things that were on candles,
Mm.
with no credit. Um, so just some shade. Read between
Oh.
them. But when he was talking to people that there's this concept in the borderlands, the Rio Grande Valley and things that many of the people there, one of my teachers, but not, I've had four main kind of guides and teachers in curanderismo. One of them did refer to dead curanderos and curanderas as poderosos. And
Mm.
the term that Brian used too, and that Manuela Porres and a couple of the other curanderos and curanderas that he worked with, whose names escape me right now. It's been a while. But that poderosos were the mighty dead. The curanderos and curanderas, the curanderes, I suppose we can go to the gender neutral there. The curanderes that you could call upon to help teach you. And this is the dead magicians of akin to what you do, right? That calling upon Teresita, la Santa Cabora, to call upon Maria Sabina, to call upon any of these your own teachers that have died and their teachers that have died, that this is part and parcel of how we work.
Yeah.
And that they themselves can speak through various means, through whether it's vigils with lots of sleep deprivation and candlelight, and you starve the oxygen in the room and then you burn frankincense, which is a mood alterant,
Mm.
and then you take mushrooms on an empty stomach, and the saint statue starts turning its head and talking to you,
Right.
and says, like, by the way, this person needs to be baptized 3 times in 3 different churches, and you put this mud from this at the base of a juniper tree to this person's belly, and they will expel a worm, and that worm will kill it, put it in a jar, and take it to the church and have the priest exorcise it before it's thrown into the creek or something.
Yeah.
But like, we're looking for prescriptions, we're looking for medicine, we're looking for results.
Yeah.
We're not looking for endless spirit descriptions. She's not interested in cosmology. Catholic cosmology works just fine. Masatec cosmology works just fine. However, those two blend, it's up to her in the moment and her poetry.
Yeah.
But it's still poetry that cures.
Yeah, that's really beautifully put. Yeah.
Diatribe not over, but over for now.
Diatribe like mystery is a continually renewable resource.
I have stepped through the carcerian door of my own hubris, and I will hit my head on the door frame every single time. But
and what lessons in those knocks to the head?
Yes, I hope yeah. So upon that, we have covered our topics. Wow.
Yep.
Our topics.
All our night ravens. Yeah.
All our night ravens belong to us. But yeah, that was fun. So I'm left with the night raven with a rose in its mouth, clawing its little talons like thorns into the head of Saint Rose of Lima, whispering little demonic interludes of temptation, and the echoing of, I like to be curious. I'd be curious if Maria Sabina ever invoked Rose of Lima in some way. But certainly the quality that the scent of our actions is like a spiritual calling card, I suppose.
Yeah, a marker of what we how we program and are programmed by the airs around us. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, know them by their works and the smell they have from working it.
Yeah. They totally tell you this. You smell like witchcraft.
Well, yeah, that Robert Farris Thompson thing about funk, yes, means a smell that's not necessarily pleasant, but might be linked to an older term for the smell of your elders who've been working really hard for you. I love that. Yeah. Well,
on that note, I will say happy feast of Saint Rose of Lima, and thank you as always, Dr. Al, for chatting with me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks to everyone for listening. Yeah, wish you all pleasant night ravens to sing you sweetly.
Throw all those little children in your sack.
Yeah. I hope
all gotta eat something.
I hope what keeps you up at night, dear listener, inspires you. The unending rows of passion and a fine compass to navigate those thorns and petals of the world. And I hope all our choices help us hold our love more dearly. Yeah, absolutely.
Check us out, radiofreegolgotha.com, speakeasyofthedead.com, folk necromancy Facebook group, and maybe someday an Instagram or Twitter or something. But thank you so much. This has been episode 38, and we are Radio Free Golgotha. Thank you and good night.
Cheers, everyone.